And I just want to say welcome to everybody who's watching us on Facebook and Twitter. We've just gone live in the SEL and education community in both spaces. So hello to everyone who is joining us from social media. Thank you for attending.
Hey Carl, good to see you.
I finally joined the right group.
Yeah, no, it's been interesting watching across the day you stumbling around blindly in cyberspace, knocking on virtual doors and being turned away, and then searching alternatives. It's been like one of those challenge rooms for you.
You can definitely tell that this week has played a little bit of a toll on me.
Yeah. This is exactly why, you know, spatial reasoning and sort of metacognition will be the fundamental skills for the next decade.
Tell me about it. Tell me about it. I'll have a well-deserved beer after all of this. I'm telling you right now.
Indeed. Good for you.
Hello, everybody. Luca Parry here. Good to see you all.
Awesome. Hi, Luca. I think we're almost at top of hour, Matt. So whenever.
Yeah, I think we are ready to get started. So I'd like to welcome everybody officially to session 2 of the Karanga Global SEL Conference. For those of you who attended session 1 earlier in the day or almost yesterday, depending on where you are in the world, thank you very much for coming back. For those of you who attended our public assembly that happened a few hours ago, that was hosted by the Sign Network, thank you for participating in that and coming back. And for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, want to thank you for coming out. Also letting you know that you didn't miss out. Don't have any fear of missing out for the stuff that happened earlier. That's all recorded and available, so you'll be able to see that stuff at your leisure. So with that, I'm gonna let Luca take it away. Tell us a little about yourself and about Karanga.
Thank you so much, Matt. Hello, everybody. It's a delight to be joining you here from South Australia. I'm at my family's farm, of all places, which is this lovely 10-acre block near the beach. Of course, incredible times we find ourselves in. I'm on the executive committee for Karanga, which is the Global Alliance for Social Emotional Learning and Life Skills. I'm an educator by training and calling, I would say, and I really just feel very much at home, you know, alongside colleagues that are also in kind of, well, in the education game, I would suppose. I've been a teacher, a school principal. I've been a teacher trainer for a number of years as well. And for the last 18 months, I've really been investigating this field of social emotional learning, positive psychology, of 21st century skills and capabilities. And so that's taken me to a whole range of different places around the world. I'm very much, well, I should say, I very much was a global nomad up until about 6 weeks ago. But of course, you know, the idea of being part of a global community is something that can be leveraged with all these different tools now. So I want to tell you a little bit about Karanga and just frame up, you know, the community and what we are effectively trying to bring about in the world. You can see there on the slide, Karanga actually is a Maori word. It's a Maori concept, which is a call out in welcome, a call out from the heart. It's part of a welcoming ceremony. And in that sense, we can say this is a Karanga. This is a call for people to join the movement. If you're on this call, joining from social media or right now on Zoom, it's because you have an interest in this particular work. And so the genesis of this idea came from a phenomenal organization called the Salzburg Global Seminar. They are a think tank that is based in Salzburg, Austria, and which was founded in 1947. Effectively after World War II, of course, another great time of significant challenge for humanity. Europe was absolutely decimated in terms of the infrastructure. And so there was a plan put in place called the Marshall Plan to reconstruct the infrastructure of Europe. But the intellectual infrastructure had also been completely damaged through the World War and, you know, genocide and Holocaust as well. So the idea was, how could an organization support growing the intellectual infrastructure again, a Marshall Plan for the mind? And so Salzburg Global, and many of us here on this call are fellows of Salzburg Global Seminar, effectively has been convening really interesting groups of thinkers and doers really since 1947. And one of those work streams has been education for tomorrow's world, and particularly well supported by some phenomenal partners. I see Mark Sparvel there from Microsoft, Matt from Committee for Children. There's some really wonderful people working in this space. You know, we've been exploring social emotional learning and the role that it needs to play in learning systems everywhere, be they formal contexts like schooling, be they informal or non-formal as well, in terms of any learning happening at a community level. And so just on 12 months ago, in fact, it was 12 months ago when we launched the Salzburg Global Seminar Statement on social emotional learning on the International Day of Happiness. So happy International Day of Happiness to all of you. And so effectively we thought, well, if we're bringing, it really is a time for action. How can we connect people together and share what is emerging practice and best practice to make sure that every young person, every learner in any context is being equipped with the skills, the knowledge, the dispositions that they need to thrive in this volatile, uncertain world. And of course, 12 months ago, we didn't think we would be in this kind of situation we are right now. But indeed, I think this increases the need for these kinds of capabilities and skills globally. So Karanga has been set up. We have a phenomenal steering committee of many amazing thinkers and educationalists, doers, philanthropists, policymakers, practitioners from all over the world. And we really want to, our vision is a thriving world where all learners, and we say learners, not students deliberately, all learners are enabled with the skills to succeed in school, in work, and life. So this goes well beyond just the economic paradigm, which is important but not sufficient. Our mission really is to try to support policymakers, practitioners, and researchers from all over the world to promote, equitable and quality social emotional learning and life skills. And then we have three verbs there, as the linguist in me would say, it's really to connect people together, ideas together, to coordinate as well, to help curate some of those conversations, some of that action, and then to ultimately drive action. We want to be a do tank, not just a think tank. It is about the ideas that emerge, but it's also about how things change for people in the real world. Not least of all because we are seeing unprecedented change, certainly in my lifetime, in terms of what's happening. And we don't need to dwell on the impacts of COVID-19, but they are incredibly significant across every single part of society. So what do we actually do? Well, we do four things. One is that we advocate, and that means having a whole range of different strategies and mechanisms to ensure that social emotional learning, life skills, transversal skills, soft skills, really these all refer to the same constructs ultimately, that they are being centralized in education systems, in conversations, in policy, as opposed to being the add-on for a Tuesday 2:15 session where we're going to have 30 minutes of social emotional learning, then we go back to our old ways of doing learning to kids, to learners, as opposed to with them. So the advocacy piece is really important part of our work. The second is the idea of a connected community, not least of all in the this age of social distancing, which I'm consistently trying to reframe as physical distancing. We are together right now, albeit separately. So this idea. Sorry about that. So we need to connect the community together, and just by doing so, there'll be value created. But then also, enabling people to share their best work, their best thinking. We know there's phenomenal practice and phenomenal policy happening in all parts of the world. The challenge is with this level of information, it's like drinking from a fire hydrant at full flow. You just cannot find what you're looking for anymore. And so that connected community is a really important part of the work. And obviously one of the manifestations of that is this particular convening with some of our wonderful partners. The third is implementation support. If you are a practitioner teaching grade 5 and you're interested in this work, where do you go to find information? How can you be supported to shift your practice in ways that support learners? powerfully. And so the idea of implementation is being as close as possible to the practice, not just being a policy shop, but actually having a line of sight between here's the idea and here's the action. You know, so the principles are few, but the methods are many, because context is queen always, as we know. And finally, it's supporting cutting edge research. We know from the psychology literature, for example, that the vast majority of research occurs in countries in countries that only have 5% of the population, you know, and that do 90% of the research. They are the United States, the UK, parts of Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, primarily. So there is a really important call here. We need, I think, increasingly compelling evidence that's emerging from all over the world, if this is truly to be a global alliance, where we can actually have those information flows, the knowledge transactions taking place. You know, and we have some wonderful partners within the Karanga community, of course, many working in the global south or, you know, low-income countries who are doing phenomenal work with very limited resources. And of course, that's something that all of us can take as inspiration. So that's kind of Karanga. Of course, you can see we have online presence, of course, karanga.org, and we are attempting to be the holder of the global ecosystem. We don't want to create any content effectively. We don't think that's required, because there are amazing groups doing this work already. And so it's about being able to share that practice in really powerful ways that connect the community, help us to coordinate, and then ultimately to drive action in a meaningful way for learners, be they children, young people, adults, in fact, any of us as the global citizens that we find ourselves in this moment right now. So
right.
that's
thank you, Luca. And next up, we'll be hearing more from Luca in just a moment. But I want to give a chance for the other co-hosts to introduce themselves. Next, Mark, can you say a little bit about you and yourself?
Can do. I think you might just need to jump back a slide. As handsome as your picture is, though, Matt, that's a little bit narcissistic of you. Hey, happy United Nations International Happiness Day, everybody, and thank you for taking the time out of your personal lives and professional lives to join us here. I'll keep this short. We know that emotions matter. You know, they influence our cognition, our attention, our motivation, and they matter greatly in school. As we know, it's an emotional roller coaster, especially now. I currently work for Microsoft in education. I'm a fellow of Salzburg. I'm a founding committee member of Karanga. And I've been interested for 25 years in these topics of values and ethics education, stretching back to my time as a principal and teacher in South Australia. Great to have Margot Foster joining us here and other folk. One of the things I guess that I've learned over the decades is that there are shared challenges. And the great thing is, where there are shared challenges, there are also shared solutions. And coming out of the Salzburg seminar was this need, as Luca has touched on, to bring the collective together to actually engage in knowledge exchange and to build practical ideas. How do we translate policy and well-intentions? How do we translate those into actions? So as a direct result from the Salzburg Global Seminar, a group was created, the SEL in... Oh, sorry, I thought there was an audio. We created a group called the SEL in Education Collective, and it's grown. It's a Facebook group that's grown by about 100 people a week and is currently just about to clock over 4,200. We've got Carl joining from here, plus a bunch of other voices across this morning and this afternoon. So if you like, this is the place where people come. It's a persistent community where people can share best practice, policy, ideas, research, and also make connections with other people across the globe passionate around this topic. So I've popped in the text chat box here the link to join the community. Would encourage you to do that. We've partnered recently with Committee for Children. You'll be hearing from Matt in a moment. And we're really happy to be joining the other supporting organisations today, you know, as part of this kind of knowledge exchange around social and emotional learning. Because one of the things that we know for sure is that good news should travel fast, especially in education, and especially now. So enjoy the conference. Looking forward to engaging with you during chat time, at any time, in the community, and also in my session coming up in a couple of hours' time, where we'll explore the role of education, technology, social and emotional learning. Back to you, Matt.
All right, thank you very much. And I just want to say hello to everybody myself. My name is Matt Pearsall. I'm from Committee for Children. We're an organization that for 40 years has been seeking to create a world where safe children can thrive in a peaceful world through social emotional learning. And it's really my privilege today to kind of support this and help all of the voices that you're going to hear reach you, and we can all learn from them. I just want to do a little housekeeping and let you know about some of the features that are here. As Mark was saying, at any time, feel free to jump in the chat room and share your thoughts and communicate with other attendees. You can find that down at the bottom of your screen. And also, there's a Q&A button down there. You feel free to use that. You can put up questions that as presenters are speaking, and we will try to get to them. I also want to let everybody know that's watching on Facebook and Twitter that we are watching that as well. If you've got questions, feel free to put them up there. And finally, if you are watching this on a recording, thank you very much. We really appreciate having you watching us asynchronously, and to let everybody know that we'll have the session materials and recordings of this available afterwards as well. So with that, Luca, I'm going to hand it back to you to kick things off with our first speaker.
Keynote speaker, so to speak, Matt.
Yes, keynote. That is the term, I think.
Well, I mean, it really is this wonderful new learning for all of us, you know. And I think I just want to acknowledge all the background work that's come to this point as I introduce who is, I think, just a fantastic educationalist, Margot Foster. Margot is the Director of Professional Practice for the South Australian Department for Education. She's a colleague of mine from some previous work that we've done. She's also someone that I've just looked up to, really, over my 12 years in education thus far. Just being one of the strongest advocates that I have met so far globally for the voice of young people in particular. And over kind of these decades of work, she just remains, in my view, one of the most innovative educators that is doing this work. And she has, of course, incredible experience at every level of the system, which is incredibly important. Margot can speak directly from her time, you know, leading schools as an educator, and then also for a number of years leading a really interesting piece of work, which she's going to take us through today, particularly around learner agency. It's something that's been acknowledged at not just, you know, a national level, but also internationally as being pretty groundbreaking in terms of how do we build some of the key capabilities that we know matter. So Margot, it's wonderful to have you. I know that you've been, your voice has been leaving you a little bit, but once you are unmuted, I'd love just to hand to you, because I, for one, am really excited to hear you take us through kind of the development of that really amazing piece, in terms of what can the world learn from some of our work here in South Australia, what have we been learning from the world, and also, you know, where are we right now in terms of, you know, I would say the interaction between social emotional learning and learner agency, in terms of building not just the results, but, you know, the capabilities, the plus that we used to talk about, that actually ensures that young people are set up for this world that we're in right now and the world of tomorrow as well. So Margot, thank you so much for giving your time from your lovely little house there in the hills of South Australia. Over to you.
To screen share and go to I have to apologize both for my voice, which is back but not back fully, as well as being ill this week means I haven't skilled myself as well as I would have wanted to in this medium. So I'm just going to go now into playing the presentation, and I'm hoping, Matt, can you confirm that it's playing full screen and it's okay?
Well, we're not seeing it yet.
Oh, okay. That's a worry. Let me try again. Okay, so screen share. Okay.
We're enjoying the view, Margot. So
Yes.
there's no
It's beautiful.
pressure here.
Enjoy the birds.
We can see the birds on the bird feeder behind
we-
you.
Yeah,
You can see the green share button with the little arrow in the bottom of your toolbar.
I'm just having a quick look. Sorry, I don't know
That's
what's
okay.
going on. I should have checked in with Mark before I got here. So try that again. Ah, better. Thank you. Very helpful.
You can
Share that one.
thank South Australian Department of Education for those IT skills that I have.
There we go. We're
Very good.
live.
Wonderful.
That's pretty true. Okay, so thank you for that help. I didn't know how many people are familiar with South Australia. I know Mark and Luca are, but essentially we're in the middle and we're down the bottom. We're the driest state and the driest continent. And so I thought you might be interested in this image that a teacher sent me recently during one of the last droughts about kangaroos on their school oval. So I hope that gives you a pretty good picture of some of the major issues that are facing us in South Australia. What I wanted to do this morning was actually start with one of our learners. This young lady is Bella, and Bella was one of our student learning ambassadors. So I just wanted to start with her voice and the sort of learning and insights that we glean from working with young children in this work across South Australia. The audio in the classroom was pretty difficult, and so it's also subtitled.
And you can't, your brain can't control you because it can tell you to do very silly things and not encourage yourself in your learning. And it's very important that you have good thoughts. And if the brain tells you that you're going to be bad at this, you say, no brain, you're wrong. I'm going to have a good try at this, even though I didn't get it right. That's it. You can know your brain.
So what a dream it would be for teachers, I think, and for all of us to have young children who had that sense of self-efficacy and that sense of agency as learners. And I think Bella was one of our first student learning ambassadors, and this work emerged from what we call the TEFL pilot, and I'll go into what that was all about. But essentially it was how do we go about activating student voice in learning so that in fact they become, as Luca was talking about this morning, powerful learners. So the work began a long time ago. There was a decade-long project called Learning to Learn, and we've been, I think, extraordinarily lucky in South Australia that we've had some, I think, very progressive thinking departmental leadership over many decades. And this program was essentially hundreds of teachers across the state coming together with thinkers from around the world, not people to come and tell us what to think or what to do, but to generate a professional learning community. And from that work, what was fascinating was some very clear patterns emerged. And this was right at the cusp of the turn of the century. And of course, we were at that time very interested in neuroscience. So we met with people who were looking at neuroscience, stress and learning, the role of emotion in learning. There was a whole soup, in a sense, of learning that we were engaged in. And what was interesting was from that work, we started to see in our classrooms very strong shifts in terms of social inclusion and democratic practice. And we've learned from this work that sharing of power is probably one of the most significant things that must happen in terms of developing learner agency. But if you have a look at some of those outcomes on the right-hand side there, you can see so much of that is connected into the social and emotional learning agenda. And so much of it, so many of those skills and dispositions are absolutely foundational to, I would say, to any learner's achievement and engagement. The other thing that was really interesting was this triangle, which we learned, which was about, this is about teachers. And what we learned was that teachers' epistemology, or the way they conceive or construct or think about knowledge and learning and how meaning is made, etc., their optimism about a learner's capacity to learn has massive impact on their pedagogy and the way they actually enact their role of a teacher, an educator. From that work, what occurred was that the teachers who had been involved and who are still connected in many ways through networks and so on, the teachers said to us after that decade-long project, look, you know, it's crazy that we don't capture this thinking. And so I'm always wary of capturing. I think capturing things often kills it stone dead. But the teachers actually self-manage the process of getting together in the first place. And if you have a look at this framework, this is now actually our state policy position on pedagogy, on teaching and learning. And what you'll see is the top domain is called learning for effective teaching. What our teachers were saying to us was, look, if we're going to work with our kids differently, if we're going to really design learning experiences that allow them to construct meaning together, that's dialogic learning processes in the classroom and so on, we've got to learn about that ourselves. And so the teachers were really clear that they need to understand how self and others learn. They need to develop deep pedagogical content knowledge of curriculum and learning and so on. And so that was a really clear outcome. And I think we had not anticipated that, but teachers were very explicit about it. And I guess then the way in which, how do we optimise kids' learning so that they are learners with agency and are lifelong learners and develop those dispositions and capacities we want them to walk into any context with. Whether we're adult learners or kids, these bottom three domains, 2, 3 and 4, they're essentially three big ideas about the conditions for learning, about expertise as a learner and confidence and skills for that, as well as, of course, the need to personalise and connect learning so kids see their own lives and experience in relation to what's occurring for them at school. It would take a very long time to unpack this, so I won't, but what really this pedagogy position is about the conditions for learning. And I think what makes this work unique is that we were very explicit that in South Australia, we want to develop expert learners. That's quite different. When you look at other teaching frameworks or pedagogic frameworks, they often talk about the act of teaching or high impact strategies and that sort of stuff. We were really clear, if the kid's not involved in this story, it's not going to be powerful. So what we did, we were interested, once that work sort of occurred and that had been stitched down, that was at the period where the first global financial crisis, where Kevin Rudd was our Prime Minister, was putting out massive amounts of money out across Australia to hold the economy. And one of those streams was educational research. So we were very fortunate in South Australia to receive a really significant research grant that we conducted over a 3-year period. And what we were looking at was we really wanted to explore this relationship between teachers' pedagogy, learner engagement and achievement, and really broadly defining learner engagement. And in Australia, we have a national declaration about schooling, and it's both about academic achievement and also about successful, confident citizens and learners. And so our measurement around engagement and achievement was very, very broad. From that work, what came out of that was an internal departmental report. But what I want to do is just share with you from this sort of 3-year piece of work that we started with our most complex and disadvantaged schools and then generalised across the state. What we found from that work was a huge amount of information that we never knew about before. And so we had lots of findings about teachers and their pedagogy and what that looked like, and the relationships between teachers' worldview, how they conceive the world and learners and learning and knowledge, and the quality of their pedagogy. We also found out a lot about how our kids in South Australia were viewing themselves as learners, and we were deliberately exploring mindset, looking at learner resilience and using the work of Guy Claxton and the UK around ELI. So I'm not going to go through all of these, obviously, but I just want you to see the sort of the span of the findings from this work, because it was really quite gobsmacking in many ways. So the piece I want to share from you this, though, because I think this is a very underexplored area. When we have a look at this box here on the left-hand side, the research, yes, it was compelling, and it did reveal, as everybody who's been a teacher or in a classroom or a parent would know, the complex interrelationships between our pedagogy and our actions and learner engagement and achievement. So I just wanted to draw up a couple of examples from this, because what we often do is I think we play in the space of action, but we don't get into belief systems and deep work that supports us do long-term change. So a teacher's belief about their role was a very strong determinant of their practice, and depending on the extent to which they saw their prime role, there were three basically, and you'll see them over on the right-hand side in the top slide. Teachers basically saw their role as either covering the content and controlling the kids, you know, that's my job, controlling the masses and delivering the learning. Or there was a very strong number of teachers who saw it as my job is to be in strong, positive relationship with kids, but in fact there was very little learning going on. So what was really fascinating was, I think particularly also because of our teachers' absolute care of kids and focus on wanting them to be happy at school and so on, this other high relationship low challenge, or what the researchers coined as being relationship rescue, that was over 60% of our teachers. And then we had our, what we call our learning designers, who were much more in the moment with the kids, clear about what they wanted the kids to really master, and were responsive to where the kids were and what they needed. So that sort of those three patterns, then we also found that that was connected to whether they saw their role as being a deliverer of a script or as a designer. And a design, of course, is responsive. And so our thing in South Australia about intentional and responsive learning design has become a really significant key for us. What we found was that high relational support, and that's, I guess, probably was different to what we were expecting. We had thought that, you know, maybe kids were feeling more isolated in classrooms and so on, but in fact, kids were very strong about and positive about the social context of their classrooms, and particularly in our disadvantaged schools. But the cognitive demand, what we were doing was saying, it's okay if it's too hard, don't worry, you know, you don't have to do that. So what we were doing was giving kids an out all the time. And in fact, of course, what we want our kids, our most disadvantaged kids, what we want them to do is to be able to master and feel confident in any new context. So essentially, there was really very little productive struggle, and learner identities, kids had low resilience and they had very low persistence in their learning. And then when we looked at our national testing, you could see that when it was recall type items, our kids were happy, yep, I know it or I don't, and I fill it in, etc. But when it asked them to think about a more complex context and transfer their knowledge and thinking, they go, oh no, I can't do that. And they would just give up straight away. So interestingly, the work that we'd been doing at the time with Guy Claxton and Ruth Deacon Creek, who were at Bristol then, what we found was that, I know that's a bit blurry, but our kids, you know, our kids were much lower on the resilience in learning, and the researchers were saying, this seriously is about the lack of productive struggle and the fact that we're not really supporting kids to step their way through something that's more complex and more difficult for them. And this was apparently significantly lower than the British profile of the kids as well. The other thing that we had looked at was very strongly Carol Dweck's work at the time, etc. And, you know, the researchers said about 40% of our kids are presenting with an entity mindset or a fixed mindset, excuse me, and saying, you know, and basically they're saying, well, you know, you're born with it or not, you're smart or you're not. And so that was, therefore, kids not bringing their resources and their will, etc., to the learning. So this work, I think what I thought I'd do is share this quick video, 3-minute video with you from one of our researchers who talked about the relationships between these factors.
I mentioned in the opening segment of this that we've been exploring the relationship between quality of leadership, quality of practice, learner engagement and learner outcomes. So we have collected some data from students. So this is self-report data based on a questionnaire, which has helped us get a much deeper insight into the nature of engagement. We're also in the process of trying to understand and analysing the links then between dimensions of quality pedagogy as measured against the TEFL instrument and different aspects of engagement. Because it's turned out that engagement isn't a single monolithic concept. It's actually quite nuanced. And this is a diagram of the nature of the relationship between various aspects of engagement. The most important part of it's down the bottom here. This is a measure of dispositions, what we call dispositions. Now, what are dispositions? Dispositions are a combination of two factors, really. The first is a student's orientation to uncertainty. When they're confronted with something new, something ambiguous, something unknown, do they see that as an opportunity and move into it? Or do they see it as a threat and retreat from it? But also in here is an aspect of agency. So when I'm confronted by something that's new to me, do I feel that I can deal with it in some way? Do I back myself to be able to move into that unknown space and be able to be effective or to deal with whatever it throws at me? That is a very strong predictor of interest. So if we don't get past that initial sense of, I'm someone who can learn, who can deal with uncertainty, then we don't even get them to the point of being interested. Now the numbers here, this is a latent variable, so we're using responses to questions to understand, to get a measure of dispositions. Similarly, we're using a series of questions, 4 here, to measure interest. And we're predicting, in this case, 67% of interest purely on the basis of this disposition. If we attract a learner's interest, then that has an effect on their sense of well-being. So this latent variable here, measured by 3 questions, is positive affect, a sense of happiness and well-being. So dispositions predicts interest, predicts positive affect. And only if we get that sense of well-being and positive affect do we get to the involvement in learning. So this is the thing that we'd normally talk about as engagement, the actual doing of the learning itself. But what this structure of engagement has revealed is that most of what's most important is actually down in this area here. And indeed, where we have already established links between quality pedagogy and engagement, quality pedagogy primarily works at these 2 levels. Quality of pedagogy encourages and provides students with the confidence and ability to move into uncertainty, to deal with that in a powerful way, and through that to actually find points of connection and deep interest in a subject area that carries them through into the behaviour of deep involvement in learning.
So I'm seriously hoping I put the right diagram in there. I can't see the 0.67, but anyway, you get the general idea. So what also came out of this work was a really interesting surfacing of very resilient limiting assumptions, actually, that I think are to do with traditional didactic, sort of old school thinking about teaching and learning. You know, that the kids are there, they're empty vessels waiting to be filled, or I've taught it, I've done my job, but if they didn't learn it well, you know, that's not my problem. Assessment's only the final judgment, as opposed to critically, what is it, where are you now, and what is it that I need to do differently as a teacher to support you master the learning, and so on. And again, that second to bottom one on the left in the grey, some students just can't learn. That appeared time and time and time again. And so that's very concerning, I think, when you think that, of course, that's, you know, that's completely counter to what we understand about the human brain and neuroscience and how brain plasticity and so on. Not that we use that as our basis, but, you know, there's enough evidence now to assert that. So we were looking then at a project or something, having learned all of this, and obviously it was a huge piece of learning for us as a system. What would we do then that would help teachers see both learners and learning anew in a different way? That was sort of the focus. I'm just wondering, Luca, as well, can you hold up a piece of paper telling me how many minutes are left? If you do that, then I'll know, because I'm not sure.
No problem.
So, thank you. So what we had was a pilot project that was established. We had an amazing schools head at that time, Gary Costello, and he was really willing to back quite experimental work. And so he wanted us to put a TEFL consultant, that's our pedagogy framework. He wanted us to put a TEFL consultant in every partnership, and I said, it won't work. You know, that is not what needs. What we need is to find some we've got to move away from those traditional ways of trying to influence the system. What we need is to find out what actually helps us move those perceptions and those assumptions that had come out. And so what we did was, we basically said, who are the gutsy principals that we know around the state that we think are up for it, and approached them and said, okay, we seriously don't know the answers to this. We want to trial some stuff with you. We don't know what to trial. I don't know what that means. Oh, sorry, Siri's having a conversation with me. But what we are really wanting to do, and the rule of this work, was that it would be shoulder to shoulder with kids. So what we knew was this is not do something, trial it with kids, consult, etc. This was co-design from the grassroots up. So if you're not up for that, or if you think that that power shift in your school would be too confronting for your staff, etc., thanks for playing, but don't be involved, and you have your gracious exiting opportunity. And so what happened was we had a number of schools, I thought, who did just some, I think, really brave and courageous things, because they were really contesting traditional structures, processes and systems in schools. And so, for example, one of them, Craigmore High School out in Elizabeth, very disadvantaged community, lots of issues. What they did was they formed what they called 5x5s. So instead of having staff PLCs or professional learning communities, they had 5 staff and 5 kids. So 5 staff, 5 kids came together and looked at the programs for the next few weeks. And the kids would say, oh, that sounds great. Oh no, that'll be really boring. Let's try this activity from YouTube. So they actually co-designed a lot of the learning. Now, what was really amazing about that was that all sorts of things happened then. The kids became the sort of like the forward scouts saying to the other kids, oh, we're going to do this and it's going to be terrific. And so there's all these lovely sort of unanticipated things that occurred as well. But if you just have a look at the growth, this was in 1 term. So 1 term is 10 weeks, a school term in South Australia. I've been an educator for 40 years, and this was by far the fastest. I just couldn't believe it. I'm saying to the TEFL staff who were connected with the schools, they must be lying. This can't be true, because this was just such rapid change. And anyway, so we saw these sorts of things going on. And then another school, Seaview High School, what they did was they had a lot of teachers who had very low expectations of the kids and kept saying to the new principal, no, you can't ask that of our kids here, it won't happen. But what they decided to do was every teacher was expected to work with their classes to identify non-Googleable questions about their discipline. And the reason what they were going after was reconceptualising, helping teachers reconceptualise, first, kids as empty vessels, secondly, the nature of knowledge itself. Now, they too, in an 18-month period, had massive gains in terms of achievement, attendance, grade band averages changed, retention improved, but we're talking huge amounts, like 30% and so on. So I'm just showing you these examples because I think it's really interesting what I learned as a director in the department when you stand back and partner authentically with people, what can occur. The other thing that happened here was that the kids started running, instead of doing instructional rounds, they started doing learning rounds. And so the kids would go into classrooms and they would observe and make notes about, this was a good stretch question. This was a good example of intellectual stretch. That was a big theme of the work we were doing. And so then what the kids would do is then they would come and present it at staff meetings and say, look, we saw this and this. It was all depersonalised, of course. But what the kids were doing was learning literally about cognition and learning and rigorous learning and so on. That now happens across the entire partnership of schools. It's 20 schools. The kids do learning rounds as a matter of course in those schools. This particular partnership is the highest, the fastest improving local partnership standardised test results in the state. So, Teach on Teams, Adelaide Prospect, one of the little girls here will tell you what her role was. I thought this group of leaders were very gutsy because they basically said, okay, we've got this work called transforming tasks. How do you take a simple learning task and make it trickier, more complex, provoke more problem solving? And what the leaders did was say, okay, I'm going to be the teacher for one of those tasks and I'll have kids who help me with it. So this is a little girl talking about her being one of those leaders.
My job on the Teach on team is to work with my teacher and transform a task in maths. The strategy my teacher and I are learning together is Socratic questioning in Tell to Ask. It's a bit unusual, I guess, because not many people have conversations with their teacher about tasks. Work is important because sometimes in maths you're just at work and you just have to do what's in front of you. So what we do is we meet together and redesign a maths task to include Socratic questions.
Teachers had more of a difficulty than the students in some of the tasks and activities.
Sometimes the teachers had trouble stepping back and letting the kids work it out for themselves. Then during the maths lesson, I observe examples of stretch thinking. Then I share them back to my teacher.
And I said I was a pioneer because this was the first time that students learned with teachers.
So the democratic classroom stuff, you could see this forcing of the single principle of co-design with kids from scratch. It was forcing all sorts of change relationships and certainly power shifts in learning. But the really fascinating thing was literally hundreds of the teachers said to us, I never knew so-and-so could do that or knew that. So the thing that came out of this work was the traditional, what became really clear was that the traditional delivery mode of schooling, where I'm delivering a package or an activity or a series of things, the curriculum to you, what it does is literally makes the child invisible because they're the recipient, they're the object of this stuff. And so teachers didn't know who their kids were or what they could do or their expertise. And so what was fascinating was how we were able to become much more conscious of stepping back, because a lot of teachers said to us when I stepped, I don't know what to do. If I'm not instructing, if I'm not telling, what do I do? I don't know what to do. And of course, it's not either or. It's definitely not, oh, it's over to you now. It's very much about, okay, so now I notice the learning and I respond. It's a very different way of being. Kids were doing all sorts of stuff. They were setting up feedback stations across clusters. They were doing all sorts of things. And there was impact on so many fronts. And I thought I'd just finish with letting you know what the system response to this was. So after this sort of 3-year program, what became really clear was that we needed different resources that would help teachers think differently about their role as educator and their programming in particular, some ways that they could harness kids' voices easily without being laborious, and setting up a student learning commissions. So one of the first things that we did was we commissioned the development of what was called the TEFL Compass. And this is a professional learning tool, not an accountability tool as teachers. And this is giving teachers an online platform where they can reflect, they get colleagues, trust they choose, everything's about them making these decisions, and who in their school can help them check out and refine their practice, and they can get feedback from kids. And so all of this is confidential, de-identified, it's the teacher's Facebook page, no one else has access to it, etc. So what we found though, it says there 16,000 South Australian students. It's now more like 30,000 kids. And the kids say consistently these same things. Give us more opportunities to collaborate. They want to talk. They want to talk with their peers about their learning. Not necessarily the teacher, but their peers. They want to talk it through. Dialogic teaching is really important. We're bored. Please challenge us more and give us more time to think and ask questions. So just knowing this is really helpful as an education system. What do we help design and give to teachers? We developed something called learning design. This is really an adaptation of Wiggins and McTighe's work about backwards planning. But really what we said was, we want people to think about the way they design learning with their kids, and you have got to factor the kid in. So what do we want them to learn? The critical box here is, what do they bring? Knowing your learners, etc. So this has become a very big piece of work across the state. It's sort of at the basis of all of our curriculum work and so on. We also design practical resources that would help teachers tweak practice. Lots and lots and lots of worksheets were being used. These tiny strategies were helping people change their existing practice, but not wholesale, moving from one way of being to another way of being and expecting too much. And I guess the most recent one that I'm really excited about and proud of, we now, for example, have an annual South Australian Aboriginal Student STEM Congress. This is the last one from 2019, where we had 1,000 Aboriginal kids, elders, community, educators, workers, teachers, mentors across the state who come together for 2 days and learn about Indigenous knowledge and how it's partnered and reflected in curriculum. And this is really about getting kids seeing themselves as having other learning identities around STEM and so on. So I'll stop there because that's really the presentation that I wanted to share, and I hope I haven't gone too much over time, Luca.
Not at all, Margot. Thank you so much. I think we'll give you a virtual clap together, but separately, as always.
Thank you.
We actually have 12 minutes for question and answers. And so there's a couple that have come through that I'll start with, but I encourage anybody on any of the social media platforms or on the chat box here, just to put in some questions. The first one is in terms of the scalability of this process. Clearly, you know, if this is the first time you're hearing about any of this, it's just overwhelming, but very clearly quite compelling. You know, has this scaled out to other systems in Australia? Like, what are the other things that are happening? And if not, what's the difference in terms of student outcomes across the different systems? Knowing that, how we measure and what we define as outcomes, I think is, you know, the deeper question that's embedded within that one. What's your view on that?
Yeah, thank you. So I would say that, and I understand the business of scalability, one of the things that I think that we learned in the learning to learn work was actually to contest even the concept of scalability. I think what we learned was that there may be knowledge out there may be information out there, but in some ways every school, every group of teachers, every individual needed to construct that meaning themselves for it to be relevant. So the way in which we work to try and scale it more broadly across this little pilot group in South Australia in the first instance was to, through, you know, the big programs, the professional learning programs and so on, like Results Plus and some of the other programs, was to bring these voices in for leaders to be able to see what was possible, what their colleagues were doing and what other teachers were doing. So we did it in a very, I would say, soft and possibly hidden way. So what we were doing was really trying at any opportunity to profile the stuff that was going on. And, you know, when people in other sites saw the change in the academic results that were resulting as well, that was a great motivator for people. At the time, this was sort of unique work in South Australia, as was Learning to Learn. But I think now when you look around the country, Victoria's doing amazing work around student agency and learning, and New South Wales heading in that direction as well. So it seems to me that its time has come, actually. So in South Australia, it was a hard ask early on to try and get this onto the agenda. But I guess, as you were saying earlier, Luca and Mark, the context of what's going on worldwide, we're recognising, of course, that we need to have much, much more diverse and complex skills and design responses for kids who are going to have to deal with what they're going to have to deal with. So,
yeah, sure. Yeah. That's great. So to that point, follow-up question. Obviously right now, you're absolutely right. The time for learner agency has always, you know, it's always been important, but never have we had 1 billion students now relying on their own agency as a learner to kind of engage remotely with ideas. You know, the idea of having a physical convening where kids can be compliant and passive if we want them to. I always used to ask the question in workshops, Margot, which is, if school wasn't compulsory tomorrow, what would we do differently? Well, here we go.
Yes.
So what's your insight in terms of, you know, there are, you know, tens of millions of practitioners out there thinking, well, how do I design this? How do I take some of this deep thinking about learner agency and obviously mindset and how that links to engagement or interest, and then how that influences positive affect, as was some of the pieces that you shared. What are the tangible things that somebody needs to be thinking about? You know, what are the things we could do immediately right now? Because our school last week, everyone was turning up. Next week, it's all online.
And I think one of my grave concern about where we are at the moment is the potential for this to turn into, and I hate to say it, but some of the worst university pedagogy where they just stick the lectures up online. And suddenly we're into this knowledge transmission, which is not engaging, which doesn't connect for kids. It doesn't provoke their thinking. I mean, I think that and we're obviously at the moment scrambling in the department to try and put together some work that would be useful and supportive of both families and schools to use, for teachers to use. But we really are sticking with, I guess, the what we call two things: the learning design work, about which at the next finer grained layer is saying, how have you allowed every child to think about this first of all? What's the provocation? So actually like an instructional model, which is ask, engage, provoke thinking before you actually start delivering solution. Design a process whereby you're supporting the learner, see something that's counterintuitive, and then have to explore to come to their own conclusion about something. So how do you maximize the opportunity for the child to do their own thinking first before you go into delivery and instruction in the traditional sense? So I think also, Luca, in South Australia, one of the other exciting things for me is that Martin Westwell, who's the new chief executive of the SACE board, you know, they are very much rethinking and looking at what does it mean to your senior secondary certificate? What does it mean to, how do we think about these transversal skills? How do we think about the measurement of those, or how do we support kids actually track those, you know, as opposed to measure them as we may have traditionally, etc. So I think there's such a, you know, and a lot in the firm at the moment that we're well on in moving towards this. But I think at the moment, of course, the worldwide context will give it an urgency it probably hasn't had, which that in itself will be a massive opportunity.
Absolutely. It, I think it speaks to that shift in mindset as well from, you know, as you say, like, what's the mindset of the educator in terms of how learning happens? And if it is a delivery kind of model, or, you know, where I instruct and the learning occurs, and then we're not going to see the kind of the transformations that you've demonstrated across real contexts here in South Australia. There's another question here, which is kind of related to what we've just spoken to, which is the first step scaffolding tips that schools can start with to build student voice meaningfully in their school. Because I think obviously there's complexity to doing this work well, but, you know, if you were to walk in as a school principal, which you've been before, and, you know, what would be the starting points? How would you convene? Would it be going toward the 5x5 model, which is very practical? You know, what would you suggest?
Yeah, well, I think we often talked about a useful scaffold just to start, because of course, as a leader, you model whatever you say is modeling what's important, and people pay attention. So one of the things that we found that many leaders were doing in their classroom visits and drop-ins was basically just saying to kids, you know, what are you doing? And oh, why are you doing that? And why is that important, learning? And really just getting teachers and kids thinking about, it's not about just having the learning intentions up on the board or the whiteboard. It's not just about this surface sort of engagement with formative assessment or clarity or mastery of learning intentions, etc. It's really about getting kids to think, and I don't know, in the learning design sort of model that we showed before, what that question is, what do we want them to learn and why is it important? That question about why is it important takes it constantly outside of the curriculum, not just because it's in the curriculum, but why is it important as a human being to understand this concept, or to be able to think like a mathematician, or to have mastered these proficiencies of reasoning, problem solving, etc., which are universal across all of the learning areas. So I think in terms of, as a leader, I would be surfacing the conversations about, you know, the clarity of intention about what you're wanting your kids to learn and what their design, what's the best way that you're doing that, what are you doing to go about that, and really, really as a leader, modeling being a learner in this work. I think just as in the classroom, when teachers are delivering information, we're creating this view that knowledge is black and white, you either know it or you don't, I'll keep my mouth shut just in case I'm wrong. That sort of, those conditions and learning environment and culture are equally as applicable to adult learners. And so, you know, I would be, as a leader, I'd be rewriting the books about, you know, if you're having a go at this, I'm expecting to see you're going to have 3 spectacular failures and you're going to find one thing that you're going to come back and tell me. So what is it, you know? But let's really be careful about making sure that we share the learning as we go, because it was so clear that for teachers, stepping out of the traditional role, how uncomfortable that was. So tiny, tiny steps, maybe small steps by starting with, you know, beginning every session by checking in with the kids about what do we already know, just a small practice. And then even then we still go back to our traditional instruction but just the very fact that you've asked and suddenly you see what kids know will start to shift your understanding about who they are. Yeah.
That's wonderful, Margot. And of course, the idea of, you know, what do you already know and how are you feeling? And leveraging this, the kind of the emotional and the cognitive, as we know, they're so integrated. You know, and then Arce and Jen has put a comment here, you know, what does good learning look like? That's the question that, you know, can always be posed. And I mean, if there's ever a moment in history to pose that question, it's what does it look like now? And to your point, it's not about just recording things and throwing things up online and its delivery model. It's, I think, thinking like the educator as a designer of an experience, but also as a co-designer with the young people themselves, co-construction of that knowledge. We are at time. Thank you so much for taking us through that. I mean, I was aware of this work, obviously, but it is every time I hear you speak to it, I just feel like this is the compelling piece about what learning needs to become. It needs to be centralized in all of our systems. And maybe now that we're canceling mass assessments around the world, it might be that particular moment in history. So please join me in a nice virtual clap for Margot Foster. Thank you so much, Margot, for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks, Luca. Bye-bye.
And enjoy that beautiful view, the beautiful view that you have out that window of the Australian bushland. Just gorgeous. Matt, I'll hand back to you to take us through into our next session. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you very much, Luca. We're moving into our next session now, and this is a session I'm really excited to hear about. We are going to hear snapshots from people doing awesome work in their communities around the world with social emotional learning. So these are going to be short 10-minute speed sessions where we get to hear about a few different topics. We're going to hear from Lisa Wright, Chapanese, Carl Mercury, and Lynn Thomas over the course of the next half hour. And so without further ado, I'd like to get started with Lisa and Chapin. Feel free to unmute yourselves and join join me here in the room.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Hi, Chapin. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. So my name is Chapanese. I'm an instructional designer at the Committee for Children. I work on the middle school team, designing and creating some of the programs on there.
And Lisa, are you there too?
Yes. Hey,
Hi.
Can everyone hear me? Hi, how's it going? I'm Lisa Wright. I'm the Equity Advisory Chair at Committee for Children as well. I also work with schools and organizations on social emotional learning implementations and training.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us here today. And part of the reason that we're so lucky to have you here is that you and Chapin were planning on presenting on the topic of equity and social emotional learning at the South by Southwest EDU conference, which was canceled. And so we're very glad to have you here. Could you tell us a little bit more about what your presentation was going to be about and yes.
Yeah. So SEL has been gaining traction as an important tool to support educational equity and also counter systematic racism. Research shows that SEL does have positive effects regardless of race, SES, and school location. But there are also some of these concerns that it could be used as a tool of cultural colonization, where we're teaching children of color to act white. So we're trying to figure out how can SEL better support equity, and is it the best tool for addressing educational equity, or are there other solutions? So the purpose of our session was to discuss the best ways that we could leverage SEL to support educational equity.
I really appreciate that you're making this a conversation, because I think there's a lot of people that have answers to that question, but it's great, but the conversation itself is critically important. Why do you think it's important to have this conversation? What's going to come out of it?
Mm-hmm. So the research has definitely shown that students of color receive significantly higher rates of disciplinary action compared to their white peers. This has lasting effects beyond the classroom and the school, and it travels with them to where it affects their future educational opportunities, employment, and income. So we have this responsibility to try to implement practices that promote equity in classrooms. So we need to ensure that all students are treated fairly no matter their background.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Chapin said. This conversation is important because every classroom is different. Every student is different dependent on one's location, family background, religious affiliations, their own values, and personal life experiences. So one strategy may work for one person, but there could be another strategy that works more effectively for another person or situation. So context matters. What I recommend when working with schools and educators is having an open conversation with students about when to use SEL strategies, and share with them that some of the skills that they're learning in school or from SEL programs may be different from the skill that they use at home. So what the teacher teaches in class is only one way of approaching a situation. There are other options and solutions to one problem. And then just encouraging the student to talk through the options with the adults, with the teachers, allowing also for that student voice and agency.
It's a theme. That's Margot was talking about student voice and agency before, and now we're hearing it again. So I'm picking up something here. So I think the burning question we all have. So is SEL an appropriate tool for addressing educational equity, or should we stop?
That's a great question. So yes, for us, SEL is a tool to support educational equity, by equipping students with the foundational skills for courageous conversations, for self-awareness skills, having emotion management strategies, and being able to problem solve with people who are different from them. One of the benefits and hopes in teaching SEL is that students have the skills to be more self-aware of their own biases, to respectively work with others who are different from them in appearance, background, and thought, to manage societal stress and or prejudice that they may encounter in their days, and also the ability to reflect on the broader ethical consequences of one's decisions and how it can impact others. And teaching SEL also encourages growth mindset. With that being said, for us, SEL is not the only tool to support issues of inequity. We recommend complementing SEL with other strategies or content that specifically focuses on issues unique to the school or community.
Mm-hmm. So taking this into account that SEL is an appropriate tool to address educational equity, but not the only tool, one of the main ways that SEL is implemented in classrooms and in schools is by explicitly teaching SEL skills. As an instructional designer who designs programs and lessons, these are some of the things that I think about when I'm creating materials with an equity lens so that all students can access the important teachings that are contained within the program. I mainly rely on the UDL, Universal Design for Learning framework, which sets out to proactively meet the needs of all learners. So some of the things that I'm looking at are in the programs when I'm creating them, or the materials, are we providing multiple means of representation, giving learners various ways of acquiring that information. So you're thinking about the media that you're choosing, the amount of words that you're putting on the screen. Are we providing multiple means of engagement? Are we providing the learners those alternatives to demonstrate what they know, like solving problems using a variety of strategies, providing scaffolding so that they're learning the skills gradually, looking at the actions and expressions. Are you tapping into the learner's interests and strengths, providing appropriate challenges, and increasing student motivation to learn? And then some other things outside of UDL to consider. Does this lesson recognize, respect, and validate students' cultural and linguistic backgrounds? Are you giving them multiple perspectives and not just applying one way of thinking into the SEL skills? And then also, speaking of the skills, you are thinking about what skills are you explicitly teaching within the lessons? Are you only teaching one way to solve a problem or one way to set goals? It's about providing different opportunities, and also the theme here, getting student voice and allowing them to also tell us about their experiences.
That's great. I wish we had more time to talk about this, but unfortunately, we do not. But I look forward to hearing more from you all about this and learning more about it. It's a really important topic, and it's coming up a lot. Yeah. So really appreciate the work that you're doing to bring SEL and equity together in a meaningful and thoughtful way. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt.
So I want to turn to our next speed session. Carl Mercury is going to join us now, and he's going. Hi. So, Carl, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are, and what brings you here?
Yeah, for sure. So I've arrived in Montreal about 2 years ago, originally from Melbourne, Australia, and it's so great to hear some Australian accents because I don't hear it very often. So I'm really enjoying this. Yeah. Yeah. So what brings me here basically is my beautiful wife, and because of that, I have had an opportunity to work. I work in a beautiful private school here, an elementary school, but part of it also is I have a private consulting company. So I get an opportunity to go out and help schools implement social emotional learning and the whole school approach. So that's my role at the moment.
And of the many things that we talking about today, you mentioned one of the things was responding to a question that I hear all the time, that comes up all the time, is when people ask, is it appropriate for SEL to be taught in schools, or is it something that should be done in other settings? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to address this question.
I guess I'm going to reframe the question more to when I'm consulting, I'll start to introduce SEL, and then I'll be covering out the 5 CASEL competencies, and I generally will look throughout, you know, in the plethora of teachers, and then you'll see that, you know, their minds are ticking away, and then eventually the game teacher will put their hand up and they'll say, look, Carl, this is not our job. This is parents' jobs. Why are we having to do this nowadays? And so, you know, it's really important to start shifting that mindset. And I guess the first thing I have to say to it, and the first thing I do say to it, it's not just the teachers' roles, and it's not just the parents' roles. It's a collective role. It's a we role. I use the word we pretty often. So that's the answer that I generally give them.
And so, and what does that look like in practice as you help schools to kind of bring this in? So what does the we look like as you help schools kind of work with families and make this a shared responsibility?
I guess what I like to talk to the teachers about is more about the factual reasons of why it's a we. So in terms of, if we really think about it, there's a really big decline nowadays in in-person social interactions. There's a decrease in community involvement. And I try to express to teachers, when I was 9, 10, 11 years old, and it was a Saturday afternoon, my mum used to say, you got to do the chores, and then at midday, off you go on your bike, and you're off, her actual rules would be, don't come home till the sun goes down. and during that time, I'm navigating the streets, and I'm making these responsible decisions, if possible, at times, depending. And I'm socializing, and I'm becoming socially aware, and I'm doing all the things that we learn in SEL, but I'm doing it in an organic way. Whereas now, it unfortunately doesn't occur. And so due to many reasons, and we can go through, you know, fear factor of parents and overprotection and sheltering and so on, to busy family lives and so on. It's now part of, we've got to take on this role and responsibility at schools. And schools are a hub of community. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be taking on this role, and schools are a social environment. So hence the reason why it works hand in hand. So but I think the main message is, it's not just our job, it is a collective, and that's the main thing that we really need to teach.
Do you see a role for schools to support families in this?
Well, that's the only way that we're really going to implement it correctly, isn't it? You know, apart from having that explicit to the organic teaching, to those general circumstances that happen in school, and then you really point them out and use that as a teaching opportunity to then actually reflect and basically communicate to parents, this is what's happening at school. Have a go. Let's do it at home. See if we can use that vocabulary, that common vocabulary that's happening and see if it can become a practice together.
Mm-hmm. And how does this partnership look like in maybe in your school? Do you speak about your own experience in making this happen?
So we have multiple parent information nights, and the parent information nights. The beauty of it is any form of practices. We have an opportunity as the educators to then basically teach the parents, so that they can go home and do the same thing at home. And then it just becomes it just becomes part of nature for the children, so that it is just part of normal practice for them. And for us, it also, by having this open communication, we are creating a form of community. And that's the whole point of being able to do this, is that, at times, especially nowadays, we have quite a little bit of a divide between parents and teachers, and we want to bring that together and make the community a strong one.
I love that you're bringing in this concept of community. In my own work, we talk a lot about how social emotional learning is a way to build a safe and supportive community in the school.
And depending on where the children are from and so on, the schools generally are their only form of community. So we need to really make sure that we embrace that.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel that the reluctance of educators sometimes when they ask if you should be taught in school, is it a reflection of their own discomfort with this?
Yeah, and I think it's not just the discomfort. I think that educators as a whole, we always want to do our best. And the only reason why we won't embrace something new is because we feel uncomfortable in teaching it, or we feel that we don't have the expertise or the knowledge. And so that's where the professional development comes in. And generally educators will embrace something new if they feel they've had the correct training involved.
That's wonderful. So we've just got another minute. And is there any last nugget of wisdom that you wanted to share?
No, I would just say that the big message basically is that we need to work together with our parents. We need to create that sense of community. We need to make sure that the children feel that they're valued in their community. And then, the actual development of the social impact of development is part of school nature. And let's do it all together.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Carl. I just like I said with Lisa and Chapin, I wish we had more time, and I look forward to hearing more about your work and in the future. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And coming up, we have our final snapshot. Lynn Thomas is going to be joining us. Lynn, welcome.
Hi, there we go.
Hi. Lynn.
Sorry, it took me a minute.
It's all right. We're all. When somebody said in the first session that we are all going to be experts at Zoom at the end of the next few weeks, but we're not there yet. So welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Could you introduce yourself briefly to everyone attending?
I'm Lynn Thomas. I'm a secondary school English teacher in Ontario, Canada. I teach grades 9 through 12. And basically, I have about 3-4 years ago really got interested in social emotional learning, mental health, and mental well-being. And it's just snowballed from there, really.
That's great. And you're going to speak with us today around mental well-being and neuroscience, which is a fascinating. It's super. I'm sorry. I could nerd out about this for a while, but I'm gonna let you nerd out about it instead. But I'm very excited. So take it away. Where do you see these connections and how are they applying to your work?
Well, being an English teacher, it really does afford me probably one of the best ways to get into social emotional learning, just because teaching that relationship building and self-awareness, because I get to teach stories, and stories are really powerful things. And they not only help us remember things better. If we weave facts into a story, we remember it better. they also, it's incredible how they activate different parts of our brain. So did you know that when you read a story, the parts of your brain that are activated are actually the same as if you were there in real life? So really, we walk that mile for real when we're reading a story. So it's one of the best ways to increase empathy and have children understand somebody else's perspective. So when you do that, you increase relationship building and make it more successful. And it's a really cool thing. So that, knowing that kind of led into the whole mental health thing, where I used to teach. One of the novels on our syllabus was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And my students, I love it, but they were, it's too hard, miss. And we don't connect, miss. And, you know, like the too hard part is not reasoning for me to take a book off the syllabus, because, you know, we want desirable difficulty. That's a good thing. But the fact that they didn't connect was really super important to me, and made me want to really take a pause and go, maybe there's something here. So I really wanted to keep it because it opened the door to talking about mental health. And so I put it out to my students. And I said, okay, well, here's the deal. This is why we teach it. One, the desirable difficulty, but two, the mental health piece. And they were like, Miss, that's awesome. We really want to learn about mental health because we don't get to learn much about it, and it's so important. We don't understand it and everything. But can we just learn about the real thing? And there was born my memoir unit. So basically, we, as a class, picked different memoirs that were all focused on mental health issues. So we had little book chat groups going on all over the place. And I've done this 3 years now, so multiple iterations later, it has evolved and basically compiled with layers and layers. So we have a book tasting, and they can pick the memoir that most suits what they want to learn about. And
wait, I got to stop you for a second. Book tasting?
Yeah, well, yeah, I go to all Starbucks on them. So I play soft music, and we bring in cookies and donuts, and I have the books set up around the room just like it's like really fancy. And I give them time. It's not, here, pick a book in 5 minutes. We take 45 minutes, you know, and they look at each of the books and really kind of sit down with the book and get a feel for what's it about and everything before they make their decision. So they choose their book, and I figure that's also supporting their mental health because they're really making an educated decision then. They're not just going, my friends are doing this one, or that cover's cool, or, you know, that kind of thing. So they get the personal perspective, reading the memoir, and then we delve into an academic perspective by researching. So the students research using databases, academic journals about the illness that their memoir is focused on. And then basically we have guest speakers, and we connect with experts via Skype. We've talked to comedians who stand up for mental health and military officers and psychologists and a professor. So we've talked to lots of different people, not only to get kind of the career perspective, but we've done whole little workshops on calming techniques and the difference between stress and anxiety, and adaptive and problematic anxiety. And, you know, we learned the 7-11 breathing technique. And so all kinds of things get flowed into the whole unit, not just learning about a specific illness, but it becomes a whole unit in self-well-being too, and self-awareness of how do you take care of yourself, and when you are stressed, what are your strategies, and that kind of thing. So then throughout that, I also run kind of a whole presentation design unit, because what the kids do then is take all their research in their little book chat group, and they work collaboratively. So there's another layer kind of added in, that collaborative work, to build a professional presentation to teach their peers about each of the different illnesses. So I do run a little workshop on creating a professional presentation. We talk about oral speaking, how nervous you can get. So we talk about stress response, fight and flight, all that, adrenaline, and how to combat all those issues, which can carry them forward as they move on in school as well. So they eventually teach their peers, and then they also have created public service announcements in the past. So that's another layer we add in to teaching them the community, our school community, the broader community. And it also gives them a really big sense of belonging, because we've created this community in doing this unit. So combined, they know more about mental wellness and their own mental wellness and how to do things about it, how to self-advocate. We reduce stigma. They definitely increase their empathy toward others who might suffer more than they do, etc. And the student feedback throughout the unit is incredibly positive. And there's so much more to it, but they really, really, and it's interesting because it's not only that they increase empathy and therefore understand others better, it increases their own identity and feeling of self-worth, because empathy goes both ways. We often think about it as going only out to others, but empathy is something we need to use on ourselves too. So Brené Brown said that, basically, we need to be compassionate to ourselves as much as we are to others. And I think that's an important thing that we need to think about. So in conjunction with all that, just kind of as the neuroscience part of it is learning about mental illness and everything, but I also build into the program talking about how do you learn? Because when students can understand, this is why we're doing it this way, because this goes with brain science, and they're like, oh, this is so cool. I share with them all that stuff about this is why we read stories. And this is why it's important that we have English literature, because I always get that question every year. Why do we do English? I already know English, that kind of thing. So needless to say, I build the neuroscience in with, knowing your stress response, knowing retrieval practice, knowing how your brain works. And it helps the students build their study skills and their understanding. And also it helps build their critical thinking skills too, when we turn around and look at other parts of the course, when we start doing blogging and they're doing a lot more self-reflection and building that into the program. So it's multifaceted, but I really think I know the students benefit from it and definitely have given feedback for finding the value in it.
It sounds like an amazing program that you've put together. I think just some of the things that, well, first of all, I want to call out something that somebody in the chat box just said, that Mary Coverdale said, saying that just your respect for your students is so apparent in what you're saying, and such a powerful thing. I think your students are lucky to have a chance to participate in what you're putting together. And I also just want to say just a couple of the highlights that I heard your call out for. There's so much. Just your call out to the building of a sense of belonging, which research really shows is so important for the success of students, especially struggling students. And there's just a lot. We haven't got time to get to it.
I have to add that, the big push for me with this is because I have so many students that the rates for anxiety and depression are so horrendous. And I just wanted to help people be happy. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because all of this feeds into it. If we make better choices, I have a friend who just wrote a book, and Rob Dunlop, and it's all about happy. And he said basically, like, I got to get the numbers right. Hang on. 50% of happiness is genetics. 10% is circumstances. 40% is the stuff we control. And that's social emotional learning, is helping us to control that 40% more successful. So it all leads to being happy, more successful. And that's why I do it.
That's great. I think as a former English teacher myself, you make me want to drop everything and go run back to the classroom. Of course I can't because they're all closed right now. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to meet you, Lynn. And I really look forward to hearing more from you as well.
Thank you very much.
All right. So we are now going to turn our attention to our next keynote speech. Give me a second here. So we are lucky to have joining us now is Jordan Posamentier, the Director of Policy and Advocacy from Committee for Children. Jordan is a colleague of mine. I am thrilled that we get to bring him here. He's going to speak about something that's critically important in social emotional learning, and that's, well, you know what? I'm going to let Jordan talk about it. You can see here, he's got a ton of experience, and you don't need to hear from me. You need to hear from him. So Jordan, feel free to take it away. I'm going to stop sharing your bio here. There we go. Jordan, are you there?
Yes. There we go.
just unmuted.
Just waiting for you to release the gate. All right. Hi, everybody. It's good to see your faces and see your names. I am piping in from Seattle, sheltering in place as we go through this pandemic. I hope everybody is keeping safe and is at home and washing your hands. I have some slides to share. Let's move to the next technical part of this presentation. I'm going to try to share my screen and just a portion of it so that we can have something other than my face to look at. There we go. Thumbs up if you can see a slide. I got some fun. Fantastic. Wonderful. I want to talk to you today about how to talk SEL to a policymaker. Any kind of policymaker. I can tell you some stories. But this is important as we think about the enabling and sustaining conditions to make sure that SEL can live on into the future in a productive way. As Matt said, I work at Committee for Children. Here we go. And the advocacy component of our nonprofit focuses very American-centric wise at the state level, at the federal level, as we work to support and advance social emotional learning, prevention of bullying, and child protection. Now, as I walk you through just SEL, I'm going to talk about policy gateways, as I call them. I'll then move and talk about the threats to SEL, of which there are several. I'm only going to pick a few that are on top of mind right now. Although I think I wrote this slide deck 2 weeks ago. I have some new ones for you as of this last week. If I have time, I'll share them. We'll talk a little bit about connection and adaption, which I think is key, and I'm just putting it out there on my roadmap to underline that so that I make sure to come back to it. Then we'll have some Q&A. However, I welcome you to chat me something. Matt can interrupt me from whichever source the question or comment is from. And I'd like to keep this as much as a conversation as possible, like I do when I'm normally in my home, which I am. So let's get started. Talking SEL. First and foremost, it helps to remind yourself of the big picture. And this is actually how I start with a lot of lawmakers. I say young people don't live or thrive in emotional or social vacuums. They can't learn or thrive in social or emotional chaos. So it's my job to convey that message to a lot of different policymakers at all levels, from legislatures to agency leads. And yes, it's US-centric, but I think these lessons are able to be taken up elsewhere, or tell me they're not, and we'll have that really good conversation. We know that SEL skills are teachable. I know Matt mentioned that and asked about it of other presenters tonight. And the idea is we'd like schools to give it far more priority to integrating SEL into development of curriculum, instruction, school culture, and so forth. So, right now, I would say, and I've been doing policy work for about 20 years, causing mischief in state legislatures and Congress for a while. SEL's having a moment. It's on the rise across the country. When you look at the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL, you've heard them come up before already, their 2018 state scorecard says about a dozen or more states have created formal policies around SEL, have anchored that work so that when attention goes elsewhere, okay, we can still keep talking about it even after it's not the thing on top of mind. But what's even more interesting is beyond what you see on the slide, we know that CASEL is in the process of convening a bunch of state leads, upwards of 40, between 30 and 40, that are interested in developing this work on their own. That's out of 50 states, so that's almost everybody. We've got some serious momentum going on here. The increase is interesting to explain. Why are we having this moment? I know from our surveys, there's a growing demand from educators, from students as well. Business leaders are interested in this, scientists, parents are interested in this, says the man with a 5-year-old who's now doing homeschool, or as my 5-year-old calls it, fake school. Parents really are looking for answers as well. And young people with a more well-rounded education, well, that prepares them for success in school, in work, in life. These are foundational aspects of everybody's existence. Why the attention now beyond just what I told you? This is what it's looking like very immediately. Attention in this space comes from political or cultural moments. We're only a few years into a major revision federally of the legislation that affects all our states. That gives states a lot more freedom to work on learning in schools that extends beyond just math and language. For about a decade, we were very focused on academic proficiency. Didn't work out. Now we're realizing there are elements that undergird success in math and reading that we have to return to, and one of those is SEL. We're also, you may have noticed, in the midst of a major political polarization. My guess is that people are looking for ways to manage that, even harmonize that in the face of significant political discontent. It's not getting any better just now. I'll say there are other salient issues beyond those two. Some of these might be American-centric, some of them not so much. We are experiencing an opioid addiction and overdose crisis. There have been several mass school shootings in recent history. And there is an uptick in youth suicide going on in the US, very disturbing. So we're likely experiencing all of these in a way that brings SEL to the table repeatedly. Long story short, we're feeling like a pretty stressed out nation right about now. How do policymakers come to SEL in response to these political and cultural challenges? I'll start by talking about gateways. What do I mean by gateways? There are a lot of gateways through which SEL walks. These are other policy areas, other fields, other points of interest. You know, policymakers, they might not be ready to pick up and fight for SEL in its own right. They've got their own pet priorities. They need to think about their political trade-offs. So SEL policy often gets developed by riding along with other areas that policymakers do have an appetite for. Some of these gateways include, and I'll just talk about a few here, mental health, school safety, adverse child experiences, or ACEs, and trauma-informed practices, and a few others that I'll just potpourri in as I can. Let's talk about mental health, which we've already heard a little bit about tonight, and I appreciate that, and I'm hoping this builds on what we've already heard. In the US, states have used a variety of policy frameworks that address mental health and complement or support SEL in some way. This can be done under a big umbrella of school-wide mental health efforts, can be done under a health curriculum, mental health curriculum, even a physical health curriculum. In the lower grades, they will talk about healthy relationships. Both important to think about are school-wide and tier 1 interventions. So all the kids within a school will receive something under these kinds of policies. Outside of school-wide instructional support, we also see SEL within a mental health focus on developing the workforce. States are pushing policies on educator trainings that address student mental health and well-being. We also see adult education on trauma-informed practices show up. Lots of bills, lots of legislation have proposed increasing school mental health professionals. We actually don't have that many. If you look at the US stats, there are more school resource officers, that means informal police, than there are mental health professionals in our schools and school systems. So these are professionals that can be tasked with providing specific SEL support and provider-led models for SEL implementation, or they just offer additional support in teaching in a teacher-led model. Very helpful. My guess is this is going to be a huge point of focus when eventually we're allowed to get back into the school building. And an interesting side note, I've heard pushback from lawmakers and from educators say, you know, we're trying to turn our educators into clinicians. Sometimes then I pivot and I say, okay, we're not talking mental health in the medical sense, in the professional medical. We're talking about mental wellness. We're talking about things that you try to work on problem solving with your kids anyway. This is not clinicianizing the workforce. This is helping them build tools that they're already struggling to find. And then I'm going to come back to the idea of youth suicide. Policy is responding to this in a number of ways. Several of us at Committee for Children actually wanted to investigate, like, what are the best methods of responding to and preventing youth suicide. There's a literature review where we show where SEL shows up in that work, which you're welcome to come find on our website, or I'll send Matt a link and he'll share it out. Because it's just starting to show up in conversations where it can be part of a comprehensive universal primary prevention strategy. Let's talk about school safety. It's another gateway. Earlier I mentioned SEL can couple with mental health. Some regions in the US do this more than others. Florida, for example, experienced one of our worst mass school shootings in history. So they've been really pursuing SEL through school safety the last 3 years. SEL gets introduced to school safety because it promotes a positive school climate and it decreases risky or harmful behaviors. How's this look in policy? Lawmakers will pick on SEL to form a pilot program, a proof point program with a select number of schools or school systems. They'll ask you to write it into their school safety programs. Or if it's already in there, the policymaker will ask schools to prioritize SEL in that school safety plan prior to developing the other things. And in the US, the other things are what we call hardening schools, where you figure out how to put bulletproof glass and walls you can't shoot through. And that's the world we're living in. So adverse child experiences, that's the last gateway I think I'm going to talk about. And one little footnote to that one. ACEs, this has been around for at least 2 decades, this concept, but it's really made headway, I would say, in the last 5 years. We actually have a trends analysis that showed a very significant uptick across state legislatures about last 2 years. There are administrative reasons for that I won't get into here. But how do these two things dovetail? How do they go together? Well, legislatures are very concerned about student well-being, ties with student mental health, and so they want to assess student ACEs and use those data to bolster supportive programs, such as trauma-informed practices to education. Well, SEL complements trauma-informed practices very nicely because it bolsters regulatory skills. It creates a safe and warm learning environment. It's particularly beneficial for kids who have experienced trauma. And more policy may look to establish resources that allow for school-wide implementation of trauma-informed supports and/or specifically trained teachers and/or pre-service folks who are becoming teachers in trauma-informed practices. I think this is going to be huge. We're already hearing talk about it federally as we respond to the pandemic for kids who have experienced trauma. And I think this is going to come up in ways that the policymakers need to hear. Everyone thinks, oh no, the kids are responding to the virus. Well, I can tell you my 5-year-old's pretty chill about it because we look pretty chill about it. I think what's going to happen is kids are going to see what's happening with their parents losing their job, or they're already in an unsafe home environment, and now that's where they need to stay. There might be issues around supervision. There's a lot that's going to come up, not because of the virus per se, but because of all the secondary consequences that we have to experience because of our response to it. Little footnote, and this might be American-centric, no idea, tell me if it's not. There has been a historic policy of kicking kids out of school when they misbehave. And we've now seen a huge turn on that across the country, where states, instead of thinking of finding supportive alternatives to out-of-school suspensions and help keep kids in school, even when there's been some sort of a behavioral infraction that otherwise might warrant their removal. This is also a focus on ACEs. A lot of kids who will act out and thereby find themselves on the plank getting kicked out, they have experienced trauma. And keeping them in school with productive alternatives can help not only preclude them from having bad feelings about school, maybe dropping out, but think about the aftermath of that. This is a way to stop the school to prison pipeline, as we call it in the States. Well, there's no one right way. We can be, as our former CEO used to say, ecumenical about this. There are lots of gateways through which SEL can walk. Workforce readiness, a means by which to prevent child sexual abuse. That is why Committee for Children was founded. Lots is happening. Governments are adapting and connecting SEL to other strategies. I think this actually is really good. I think this portends well to sustaining SEL into the future. However, there are trade-offs. When you do this gateway work, you risk never getting outright SEL champions. If SEL is always in service to something else, it doesn't get treated as a meaningful pillar of work on its own. Where does that leave us? Well, to be sure, there are places that do advance SEL by itself. The work is, the risk is that it'll just get isolated in that way. And then you got like a zebra in a horse corral. It's the last thing you want. You don't want SEL to be that thing over there. You do want it to have some sort of integration with the rest of what else going on in a child's learning experience. So policymakers need to think very carefully about this. And all of you on our call today are well positioned to have that conversation at the right time. So do they advance SEL into something else, like through a gateway? Or do they risk doing it in its own right, possibly detaching it from everything else? Well, or is it a muddle in reconciling those two approaches? I vote muddle because everywhere is different. So really, it's just a matter of what's your context? All right, let's talk threats. A couple little prefacing comments before I dig in here.
Actually, Jordan, can I jump
yes.
in for a second? Because before we move on to the next topic, we've gotten some really nice questions about what you've just been talking about, and I particularly want to grab this one that just came in. So somebody asked, how might we as a movement be shovel ready? I like that using that term here. Shovel ready for policymakers who are looking for methods and mechanisms to act during the COVID-19 pandemic.
So there's a lot going on right now. Congress by the hour changes substantively what it is focused on. It is not the right time, I think, to have that introductory conversation on, hey, I want to talk about SEL? I would say now is the time to share with those of us who do have the ear of Congress, what do you think needs to happen? I have contact with state leads, district leads. Right now, my role as I'm conceiving it is to make sure I'm supportive of whatever they need. I'm going to talk with my CEO about whether I can do a little mission creep temporarily. There are some immediate issues beyond SEL that we just have to focus on in the States. Feeding children, giving them emergency childcare. Those need to, of course, come with SEL in my view, but this is the wrong time. I would say, however, that as we proceed down this and we start talking about mental health supports, SEL, trauma-informed, things like that, you can see some one-pagers for yourself to use. They're on our website, very easy to start that conversation. I'm a lawyer by training, so I'm neurotic about citations. You can see the evidence base that we're building off of. I would encourage you to look at that and consider it your own. But the other thing is we should get together if this is something you want to do and think strategically about how to message and with whom at the right time. Your jurisdictions will vary, so it's hard for me to give you a just one size fits all answer, which is, I know it's a very lawyerly thing to say. It depends, but it does. Sorry.
All right, thank you. We've got some more questions, but I think we can hold them to the question answer part at the end. So take it away. Continue on.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Okay, back to threats. Gloom and doom. Let's talk about threats. There are many. We can only talk about a few. And when I talk about them, I want to welcome your curiosity, your skepticism. I want those what about comments, because this isn't going to sit right with all of you, possibly. And I'm prepared for that, ready to have that conversation. I think it'll be good. I'm only going to talk about two threats today. The first one is having SEL as a placebo or a poison pill. I'm going to use strong language here because I really want to get your attention. The other one is about community backlash. Let's talk about SEL as a placebo or a poison pill. The SEL market has blossomed. In the last probably 5 years, we've seen exponential growth. There used to be only a handful of providers, programs, explicit efforts in this space with modest uptake, but not like what we're seeing now, at least now, maybe 15 years in, give or take. This is a booming multi-billion-dollar industry, and not all of the interventions are created equal. Again, reminding you that I work for Committee for Children. We provide a program. We are in this mix. But not all are created equal. And that puts me in line to talk about the first threat. A massive parade of well-intentioned but uninformed approaches that call themselves SEL. There's a lot of skepticism around SEL today that it's just a rehash of the 90s self-esteem movement. This comes from certain circles, I won't mention who, but it is trying to find a toehold, and I'm trying to keep them off of. So far, so good, but it is a threat point, a risk point. You might have heard other skeptical comments just in passing, like, oh, this is soft, squishy stuff, or it's just a fad, because, hey, we have had a lot of education fads, and how do you discern when one is and one is not? So those all come up as casual or stronger resistance. But then, to those resistors, we see music and dance programs, STEM programs, yoga, even language arts and math programs, and many, many others that arguably are and apparently not SEL in their own right, but that claim to be through and through. I take that as problematic. I think it's beneficial for other programs to be informed by SEL. I actually feel like that's almost unavoidable. They should be if they're going to be good curricula. But we should also stay in our lane. SEL isn't going to learn you long division, and math is not going to regulate your emotions. We can play in the same playground. We just need different sandboxes. So there's my first threat for you. How are we doing? I'm going to get some chats. Well, Matt, you'll field them later. So trying to capitalize on SEL is problematic. That's the first thing. But let's dwell on the second point that I mentioned a moment ago, where non-SEL programs claim to cover SEL. Again, all those subjects might include SEL, they might be SEL informed, but there's something else. And to my mind, trying to capitalize on them is going to cause a problem. Because why? Well, it's entirely possible that these non-SEL programs engage in SEL splendidly. It's also entirely possible that they don't. Who's to say? There's a lack of articulation around a research base, and that to me is extremely troubling. Why? It's not only might they not generate positive SEL outcomes that we actually all want and hope for, that's the placebo, no effect, but they could also be doing harm. That's the poison pill. I'm sorry I missed some of Lisa and Chapman's earlier comments on SEL, but there is a risk about accidentally weaponizing SEL. For example, in a way that it excludes a kid who's academically excuses academic underperformance. Says, this kid just terrible at SEL. That explains why they're no good at math. Or it could make SEL a weapon to select kids into more rigorous and enriching programs. Look how well regulated this child is. They get to go to special math. That I think is a real and true threat. And let me now pull out my crystal ball and tell you what I think is going to happen. I think what's going to happen is sometime in the next 3, maybe 5 years, that's how long it'll take to run a reasonable randomized control trial. You're going to see a study. It's going to get published and it's going to say, this school or this school system tried this thing called SEL. I'm going to define it however I feel. Nothing happened, or bad things happened. But one way or the other, it didn't work out. And those of us who live and breathe this work We'll be crying from the sidelines that it wasn't SEL at all, or it wasn't research-based SEL, or it wasn't SEL with rigor. And it won't matter. The news will be published and the damage will be done. That is threat number one. And so I want all of us to think about how are we going to get ahead of that? How are we going to get ahead of that, knowing that that will be published at some point? I've already watched it happen with restorative practices, for example, which marches alongside SEL in many different contexts. And we were not prepared, by the way. So now restorative practice is getting battered about in policy circles. What's the fix? How do we get ahead of this? First and foremost, let's put up some guardrails in SEL policy as we build our work in this space. Be clear about what is SEL and what's not SEL. In the states, CASEL is essentially claiming the beach on this because that's what states are framing their policy around, CASEL 5 competencies and the underlying research they've been showcasing. There are many different frames, that's cool. But we have this common language that CASEL set up that I think is very comfortable and convenient. We should also be explicit on what is a rigorous research-based approach. That doesn't mean we can't try others. We can just call them out as interesting, maybe even promising, but note that they're as of yet untested. And then we tailor our policy and budget accordingly. That's my first big threat. I'm gonna move my next one. Are we ready? Yeah? Sweet, okay, let's do it. Community backlash. This one's very different. And I'll talk a little bit about parents and a little bit about educators. And Carl, I'm going to build a little bit about what you talked about earlier because boy, that comes up all the time. In the US, this threat comes from, I would say, organized groups who claim to speak for parents. I'm not entirely sure if the organized groups actually represent the communities, but they're organized, and I don't have the luxury to think otherwise. So I'm going to take for granted that they matter. The backlash goes something like this. SEL is the parent's job. Schools, by doing SEL, usurp and undermine the role of the parents. Just like Carl, just like what you were saying, it is one of the #1 concerns for policymakers. It is where they go to first. And then they go even farther down this rabbit hole. They'll say, schools are social engineering, liberalizing or feminizing our children, our boys, really. That's what the accusation is. Imposing their values on our kids, running counter to community interests. I take all these as fear-based culture clashes. How do we get the fix on that? Well, I'm going to start by doing a little SEL here. I'm going to validate their concerns. I'm going to acknowledge where they're coming from. And here's how I do it. I think what Carl shared is actually very similar to how I think about this. And I think the we role that you were talking about, Carl, that is really where I'm trying to get people to go, that frame. But here's the language I use when I'm talking to skeptical policymaker A who has announced the role of the parent. I say, yeah, you're totally right. The parent is the child's first teacher. Schools and school systems should honor that role of the parent, not by ignoring it, but by reinforcing it. At school, let's work on at school, the good work you're doing at home. That's the first thing, that's validation. Then I move into another little method of SEL. I give an empathetic comment. I say, parenting can be challenging, right? Schools and school systems can ease that burden, support parents in that challenge, work with a team of school and parents together, applying evidence and expertise to work on these shared hopes and challenges with their kids. I'm gonna true it up a little here. I acknowledge some of the tough realities at this point. And really what I'm doing is I'm trying to knock the blocks down before they become shields that the lawmaker puts up so they don't have to deal with me anymore. I say sometimes parents flounder. The troubles of the home don't go away when we enter the schoolhouse door. And for some young people, home life is considerably troubling. Schools and school systems have the chance to work with those young people to help them now, to manage the adversity now that they're experiencing, to find safer and healthier pathways in which they might thrive in the future. And then I true it up. Last thing, I give sort of the unavoidable, sobering reality of it all. I say, bottom line, educators are responsible for our kids for many hours of the waking day. Kids don't, just like I said earlier, kids don't learn in social and emotional voids. They can't learn in social and emotional chaos. Remember that? All learning takes place in a social and emotional context. So we have a choice here, educators. We can either ignore the social and emotional lives of students and bully through the learning day, or we can acknowledge these parts of a young person's learning experience with care and attention, with the best evidence and professionalism we can offer, with the utmost respect for the home, and in letting the school serve as teammate to the family.
All right, Jordan, this has been fantastic. Yes, oh, sorry.
I can leave it there. I can leave it there.
We are running out of time. I mean, it's like,
yes,
unfortunately, we can talk for hours about this, can't we? I just want to thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this. And we've got a few questions that have come in, but unfortunately, and I apologize to everyone who's asked these questions, we just don't have time to get to them. But Jordan, I know you were asking about whether this was specific to the United States or not, and we did get some people saying that some of these threats are showing up on Australia as well. So I think that this is not just limited to your experience. So thank you so much, Jordan. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us, and say thank you also to your family who have let us borrow you for the evening. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joanne McKeon, who is going to introduce our next session.
Hello everyone, my name is Joanne McKeon, or commonly known as Jojo. It's lovely to have you all on the call today, and I just would love to introduce you to Mark Sparvel. Mark is going to take us through some exciting new toys that we can play with while we have some time at home. I'll call them toys because he will make them fun for us, and it's a really exciting time to have him with us today. Mark is a senior leader at Microsoft. He's been a principal, he's been a teacher, he's done some amazing work. He's been working with us at Karanga. He's been a member of that for a long time. He's set up the SEL and EDU, and he's a fellow of Salzburg. He's been working globally for a long time, and we're really lucky to have him with us. So thank you very much, Mark. We'd love to give you the time to have some time with us for the next half hour and just share your toys with us all.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Could I just get a thumbs up if people can hear me okay? Perfect, that's brilliant. So hi everybody, Mark Sparvel here. Welcome to either the live stream via Zoom, if you're watching this on demand, or maybe you're watching at this moment live through Twitter or Facebook. However you're coming across it, hello, welcome. It's 6 p.m. here in Seattle. So it's happy hour time. So I'm happy to be here on the United Nations International Day of Happiness, spending some time with you talking about this topic of social and emotional learning and technology. It's broken into two parts. The first part for about 15 minutes will be me. And then the second part will be my colleague, Adam, who will be joining us from the Flipgrid team and talking about some really exciting responses to the COVID crisis when it comes to thinking about the role technology can play in bringing people together in social and emotional contexts at a time when they might be physically different distance. You can see up at the top of the screen is the shortcut URL to the SEL in Edu community group. All of the websites and resources that I'll be sharing, including this deck, will all be available through that community. You're welcome to invite anyone. It's almost 4,200 people strong, and it supports the work of Salzburg, Karanga, and Committee for Children in raising awareness and activity and connecting expert practitioners in this space. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter too, constantly tweeting out about resources in this space. I want to be upfront, first of all, that this is not a commercial break for Microsoft. I'm going to talk generally about education technology. I'm going to highlight some products and features that could be applied across multiple platforms. The examples I'll draw from will be all free tools which are available free to education. But here's some breaking news for you, first of all. Breaking news, that little website at the top has just gone live about half an hour ago. It's a collection of resources focused on community well-being that's just been published by Microsoft in response to the current public health crisis. Again, the link is available in the community group, and I'm sure somebody will drop that in the text chat if you can't quite catch that. But again, if you can see down in the resource section, this is not Microsoft moving forwards with a position, rather we're acting as a curator across the globe with partners like OECD, UNESCO, World Bank, across the globe to bring together resources that support well-being at a holistic level: community, systems, schools, leaders, teachers, students, and their families. So how are you feeling on this International Day of Happiness? It's a good question to ask each and every day. We know that emotions matter, and we've heard this from multiple people today. They matter in schools greatly because school is an emotional roller coaster, affecting attention, memory, learning, decision-making, the quality of our relationships, physical and mental health, just to name a few. They matter in the world of work as well. And this from Jobs of Tomorrow, just published in January this year, noted this demand increasing for this particular blend of new future-ready skills. This interesting intersection, if you like, between technical skills for the digital economy, high-order cognitive skills, plus specific social and emotional skills. You know, I would say to people when they say to me, we're doing great things in our school with coding, I would say, well, if you're coding without caring about something, so what? We've got a maker space. It's great. You're making something that's connected to purpose and passion. Is it solving a problem that's significant, that means something? All of our work in schools, as we've heard from all of our speakers, has a social and emotional dimension. That and academic outcomes are like strands of DNA. They can't be separated. So we know that the world of work is constantly changing, and you would have seen this from the World Economic Forum, noting since 1980, these are the jobs requiring social skills broadly, which have surged, and those in pink, which have been falling, and those that have remained static. The good news for education is, number one, there's going to be plenty of jobs across 2030 because as we found out in our class of 2030 research, we found out that teaching as a profession is least likely to be impacted by automation and machine learning or robotics. So it's a profession predicted to grow. It's a profession also predicted to green. It's becoming younger and larger. When we think about that emotional roller coaster, one of the things that Professor Mark Brackett will always say is you have to name it to tame it. So he introduced his mood meter, which many of you would be familiar with, I'm sure, that on one axis we have a focus on energy, so high energy emotions down to low energy emotions, and across the x-axis, the horizontal axis, we have pleasantness to unpleasantness. And his comments would be that all emotions matter and they all serve a purpose. And the challenge is to be able to recognize them, understand, label, express, and ultimately regulate them. So you can move from one emotional state to another, move towards an emotional state which is helpful for you. If you're stuck in an emotional state that is unhelpful, then that's problematic, and that's where you need some more skills. So you've got a device, you're logged on, you might have your cell phone nearby. Why don't you just grab that short address, aka.ms/how are you, and just spend a moment while I'm talking or any time across this session, and you can respond to that. So just for a moment, just write it down or punch it into your device or just remember it. And at the end of the session, I'll post the results into the SEL in Education group, and you can go back there and have a look at that. A good way of leveraging technology instantly and easily and freely to take a litmus paper test on how people are feeling. This is from this morning's session. So we had a number of people respond and continue to respond around how they were feeling at that moment in time. Talking about emotions, it needs to be invitational, not instructional. And in this remote learning paradigm we're finding ourselves in, we need more invitation to connect to the emotions that we're feeling, particularly for young people who might be experiencing trauma at this moment in time. I want to call out some resources, and I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on them, but just to highlight that they're there, consider this an introduction to me, to Microsoft, and an invitation to follow up. We published the paper Emotion and Cognition in the Age of AI, research conducted by the Economist Unit. Its findings from a number of global sort of research areas, countries are all provided there. We published the Class of 2030 and Life Ready Learning, not college ready, not career ready. We published that with McKinsey and Company. That's available free, and it highlights the significant role of social and emotional skills, both for learning life and work. And in the center, there's a webinar, I can't pronounce it. There's a series of webinars or episodes that we filmed in our studios with experts like Dr. Jean Clinton, who's been on the session today, like Professor Mark Bracker, like author Alex Alcaba, the man behind the happiness curriculum at Harvard, Sean Acor. They've all been interviewed and shared their insights. There's about 12 episodes, all available for free. None of it is pushing a Microsoft product or purchase. I'd like to call out these two. Again, they're available in the SEL and Education group. When we think about technology, New Vision for Education by the World Economic Forum is most excellent. I always go back to this one. It talks about clearly what are the opportunities for education technology in this space. And it notes three things. Number one is capitalize on what works. What do we already know works in developing social and emotional skills, and how can we capitalize on that using technology? We know that strategy games work. We know that fiction works. We know that sandbox environments, which are open-ended, we know that they work because they allow for socio-dramatic play. If we know that works, how can we take that into a digital environment to take it to scale? And there's lots of great examples in this piece of research that talks about the features of those kinds of environments, the structures, the elements of play, the assessment and reinforcement. It also says as tip number 2, embed social and emotional skill development into foundational education technology products. Essentially, how can you tweak what kids are already using to make it better? And number 3, explore the possibilities. So more on that in a second. The one on the right side of the screen is great when you get the kind of comments around screen time, obesity, narcissism, disconnectedness, poor body image. Really interesting to look at what the findings were in this document by UNICEF, findings that to a degree that the researchers were able to say consensus existed amongst the literature review around those topics. That's clickbait. You find that link in the SEL and Education group on Facebook too. So let's talk about technology. How can it help? I touched on before, it said explore new possibilities. Again, I'm just going to flag this new possibility. If you don't know about UNICEF and MIT Media Lab's Deep Empathy project, you should check that out. And you should have a look at how augmented reality can help young people literally experience somebody else's reality. And when they upload a photograph of their hometown or school and AI renders it as a war zone in Syria, it makes a significant impact when we think about the lived experiences of others. Here's a couple of others. You may or may not know this. We released a new world in Minecraft Education Edition, keeping an eye on the time. It's called the Mindful Night. Interestingly, we announced it in Bet London at the start of the year. It's become, I think, the second most downloaded world in Minecraft, and it's built all around mindfulness. And I hadn't used Minecraft until 2 weeks ago. I logged in, I downloaded it, I used it, I did the mindfulness activities, I did the reflections. It blew my mind. Here's another quick example of, this is a quick snap of just the lesson plans that come with it. So there's a whole bunch of curriculum, teacher training, and other worlds that young people can use. And you can see over on the right side, these are all examples of downloadable worlds connected to social and emotional skills. Obviously, any video conferencing like we're using now, whether it's Teams video, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Skype, can support development of empathy And with machine translation, it opens up a world of possibilities. We use technology to gather together collections. This is an example of a wakelet that I've pulled together. It's like Pinterest, but it's my social and emotional skills wakelet. So it's where I capture all of the research and all of the bits and pieces that I refer to all of the time. Happy to make that available to you. I love word clouds. I used to love Wordle, but it's no longer around, so I use Worded Out now. One of the great things about digital environments is it leaves digital breadcrumbs. It leaves text that kids have written into a chat box which becomes persistent. You can slurp out that text and you can push it into a word analyzer like Worded Out, and you can start to tune into the language that's used. Another idea, if you're in an environment like Zoom, or in this case on the screen like Teams, that has got emoticons, well, that creates a whole bunch of opportunities. Imagine if you took those emoticons out and then you did some mapping against some sort of mood meter or emotion wheel. Imagine if you gave the kids a piece of text and they had to replace emoticons with specific words. You could develop that emotional granularity, which leads to self-awareness, which leads to self-regulation, and ultimately collaboration. In any environment that people can use digital ink, they can use and create a journal. So this is an example in OneNote of the names of the teachers are there. This is the journal they've created for their students, where every day they perform an emotional check-in by colouring in the mood that they're feeling on the day, helping them to self-regulate, helping them to become self-aware. Here's another example, 15 questions to replace how was school today. This teacher is a teacher who's from a school that focuses on emotional intelligence. What's hiding in the text? What's hiding in the text are emotional words. The teacher's taken an existing practice and has intentionally made sure, if we go back, that they're developing emotional granularity. The opportunities are all around us. The greatest potential for technology in education is to humanize the learning, not just to digitize the content. And we already have many ways we can develop emotional granularity with our young people by capitalizing on what we already have. These resources, the one at the very bottom, the remote wellbeing just released, are all in the social and emotional learning in education group, which is sort of catches the community from Karanga and from Salzburg and from Committee for Children around this important topic. I hope that you'll join that. We'll see you there. That's all I wanted to say. Like I said at the start, this is an introduction and an invitation. Hopefully something's grabbed your interest. I'll be available in the text chat box. But Joanne, we'll jump back to you, and then I think we're ready for the incredible Adam.
Great, thanks very much. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask from Mark?
Otherwise, as I said, I'll be in the text chat and happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mark. It was wonderful to have you share all those wonderful tools and toys. And we're ready for our next speaker, the wonderful Adam. Thank you so much for coming along with us this evening, Adam. It's great to have you here. It's wonderful to have somebody who's focusing on strategy and design, and it's wonderful to have the Flipgrid team here. So we're looking forward to seeing what you can share with us this afternoon. Over to you.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for having me today. I figured just with the interest of time, I'd kind of walk through a little bit an introduction of what Flipgrid is all about. For those of you who are familiar with Flipgrid, this will serve as a nice refresher and also kind of help guide what we think of when we're introducing Flipgrid and maybe spark some new ideas there. And then just based on this discussion that we've been having, I've been watching along and inspired by the insights. And so I have a couple examples that directly tie SEL learning into Flipgrid. But as I'll talk about, really all of Flipgrid is about social emotional learning. So let me share my screen here. And I'm getting an error message. Let's see. Hold on one second.
I was hoping you were going to be wearing that glittery jacket, Adam.
Not today. What? Oh, it looks like it's not going to let me share my screen. Let me see. Oh, here we go. This should work. Is that showing?
That's showing.
Okay, lovely. So as I mentioned, Flipgrid is all about social emotional learning. At the core, Flipgrid is a video discussion platform. We were a startup for about 3 years, and then in 2018, Microsoft saw what we were doing, loved the product, but more importantly, loved the community of Flipgrid, and decided to acquire our startup and make us part of the Microsoft family, and made Flipgrid completely free for every educator on the planet. And so Flipgrid is a completely free resource. You just go over to flipgrid.com to create an account, and everything that I'm sharing today is totally free. Let's keep going. Our mission at Flipgrid has remained the same, and it's just been empowered and even better Microsoft, and that's to empower every learner on the planet to share their voice and respect the diverse voices of others. And so just once again, tying into that social emotional aspect of Flipgrid is all about sharing your voice, but then also listening to your peers and having kind of that conversation. And what Flipgrid enables educators to do is to hear from every individual. So whereas even in these in-person classrooms, you might have 30 students, you probably don't actually have time to listen to every single student, answer every single question. With Flipgrid, you can, and with Flipgrid, your peers or your students then can listen to their peers. Kind of a funny quote. This is from one of our educators. She said, if social media and student-centered learning had a baby, it would be Flipgrid, which was flattering for our team because what we're striving to do in building Flipgrid is create an environment where students are already speaking with one another with Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok, where they're very comfortable in this medium of social media, but then pulling in the security and the value of education within that. So like I mentioned, it's quite simple. Once you create an account, you'll set up a grid, you'll add topics, and the topics are discussion prompts. They can be anything from, walk through your math thinking to, reflect on this article to, I was thinking through even the questions that Mark showed in that last slide of like, how are you feeling today? All those wonderful questions, basically anything you want to ask of your students, you can add in Flipgrid and create a discussion prompt around that. And then students share. We have free apps on iOS and Android, and Flipgrid is fully compatible on the web, any computer with a webcam. Here are just a few examples. The kind of interesting backstory of Flipgrid was it was created at the University of Minnesota by Dr. Charlie Miller for him to use with his 12 master's and PhD students. So kind of started at the university and then grew immensely in the K-12, primary, secondary, and has gone on beyond to we've seen examples of staff and PLC using Flipgrid, as well as community members and families now using Flipgrid as well to engage with one another. Just a few examples for families. We saw a Flipgrid family reunion. So they didn't all have to get in the same location. Just by nature of the year, they weren't all able to get together. So they were able to post videos from wherever they were and whenever was convenient. And then there was also a wedding guest book on Flipgrid. So all the guests could record a video, and then the married couple could go watch the videos after the wedding, after the ceremony. Just tying into SEL learning, as I talked about, here are just a few examples. So this one is an awesome call out to the Disco Library, which is a hub of resources, launch ready to use discussion prompts that you can take within Flipgrid and share with your learners. This teacher found a topic and then had students reply with a video, 5 things that made them smile, 4 words to describe their week, 3 things they plan to do over the weekend, 2 things they learned, and then 1 goal for next week. So kind of a number of things in there. But with the Flipgrid recorder, students have an opportunity to pause and record throughout creating their video. And so they can kind of reflect as they answer each of these questions. And they can also redo. There's some fun filters and emoji and text that they can add on as well to help them build their confidence when they're sharing their voice. But at the core, it's quite simple. And so while this is a number of questions that tackle a range of issues, it actually be quite fun and simple for students to answer. Another one, in nature of recent events with a lot of schools embracing remote learning practices, this came out, looks like just earlier this week, March 18th, Lisa posted just a social hour for her students, had nothing to do with learning. It was just purely an opportunity for her to connect with her students, make sure they were doing all right, and just check in on what they're doing at home and what's happening. And then kind of in the same vein, Edward, this was actually a while, or I guess not too far back, February 27. Again, nothing to do with school. This educator is an awesome educator and did some Flipgrid topics in association with the curriculum as well. But this particular topic was centered around just creating activities to continue that sense of community as his school embraced remote learning. I think he's over in China or Hong Kong. But some amazing examples there. Our team has also put together some resources that are applicable all the time. But if you go to this aka.ms/Flipgrid remote, we have a digest on just starting up with Flipgrid, what you need to do to get started, as well as some family resources. So if you want to have your families engage their learners, there's some ideas there, as well as links to some of the Disco library topics, those ready-to-use topic templates that you can launch with your learners. I also put together kind of a rough, there's 20 topics to kind of get you started, but a range of topics that kind of tackled a social emotional learning curriculum, and they're from a variety of partners. So We Movement, there's the Met Museum, Find Your Grind, Nearpod, there's a couple others in there as well, Epic Books, but just a variety of topics, and you can see a couple here that kind of touch on the social emotional learning within Flipgrid. And so once again, you can, in all your topics, get your students engaging and reflecting on their feelings and engaging with their peers with that social element. But there also are some direct SEL topics right inside of Flipgrid that you can share with your scholars. Like I mentioned, signing up is easy and completely free. You just go to flipgrid.com and then you see that kind of pink to orange button down there at the bottom, educator sign up, it's free. You'll sign up right away with either your Google or Microsoft email address. And in addition to joining the Flipgrid platform, we encourage you to join the conversation on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, and then listed here is my team and our Twitter handles. We are happy to help. We are here for you for ideas, for inspiration, for whatever questions you may have. Reach out anytime. That's my name down at the bottom. I'm at Adam Shortshorts on Twitter. But like I mentioned, anytime you can send us a DM on Twitter. Our main handle is @Flipgrid, or send us an email anytime at hello@flipgrid.com, and we're happy to answer any questions at all. And with that, I just want to thank you. I'll hang out on the chat as well to answer any questions. But once again, thank you for inviting us to be a part of this conversation. It's been lovely learning more about SEL and chatting with you all today.
Great, thank you so much, Adam. It's lovely to have you on the session with us as well. And thank you too, Mark. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask at this point?
There was a bunch floating around in the text chat just asking to access some sort of bits and pieces. So I've just put a link in there to the Innocenti paper from UNICEF, which is around how screen time from the literature is impacting youth identity, physical activity, and so on. So the direct link is there. In the SEL and Edu group, the slides that I've used have already been uploaded into the file section and they're available for folks. Adam, I don't know whether at the very start you just mentioned, did you mention the sheer number of uploads of videos that Flipgrid has had?
I did not, and let me see if I can find, it's just been astronomical in these recent days. Let me see if I can find that data.
Yeah, because I remember reading that it had passed 1 billion at some point.
Yeah, so there are over,
phenomenal.
Just like all the time, educators and students all around the world. Find our most recent stat.
Just while you're looking that up, Adam, maybe Mark, you could let us know, is there a cost for non-educators?
There is not. So Flipgrid is free for absolutely everyone.
Everybody?
We emphasize educators just because Flipgrid is primarily tailored to education, but anyone can create a Flipgrid account. And as I mentioned on that remote learning, or aka.ms/Flipgrid remote, there's resources for if you as a family member want to engage your family on Flipgrid. There's
Yep, and thanks Alaska for that question. A lot of the tools that I showed are part of Office 365, which is free for students, teachers and schools. So Office 365 is free, always has been, always will be. For non-educators, I couldn't answer that question directly. I think it depends on whether you're connected to a non-profit that might have an education identity attached to it. But I'll put my email address bravely in the text chat box. And if you wanted to find out more or needed to, you could certainly reach out to me. Happy to kind of connect you to people that are in the know.
And I can't find the exact stat, but it looks like
That's
there were recently over 300,000 videos uploaded within a day.
That's amazing.
So it's just been crazy and inspiring to see educators, especially as we're all now embracing this remote learning and working lifestyle, to continue those classroom community and dialogue conversations.
Yeah, I like the way, what I've seen is where kids, one of the big pain points for them at the moment is they're missing their friends. It's the social connectedness, it's the routine, it's the chance at times to do nothing with their friends together. And, you know, I've seen really fun examples where, you know, families have created, you know, a grid for, you know, the friends to come together, which again, it's a little, for me, it's a little bit more enclosed and safe than, say, TikTok. Would that be true, Adam?
Definitely, yeah. So that is the benefit of Flipgrid, is that when you create an account, you set up a grid and only those with that link are invited into your grid. And so as an educator, you can lock that down to your, you know, Microsoft managed school domain. For a family member, you can create unique IDs, or just plainly Flipgrid, the unique link, if you just share it with one other person, just you and that person will have that link. So it is kind of this private social media environment where you can still have fun, share videos, but only among those who you invite to be within that community.
Great. Thank you, Adam and Mark. It's been great to have you both on this section, just to give us some really good ideas and different ways of communicating. And some of the stories that we've been seeing with family and friends who are sharing their videos, it's been really exciting. So we do really encourage that. And I think the big message is that we don't want to be alone during this time. We really still want to communicate, and we really want to find ways to be able to do that. So we do really appreciate you showing us some different ideas and finding different ways to do that. I think now we've reached the section of the time for our conference where we just want to invite you as our audience to think of different ways that you want to connect with us. We're offering some ways to connect with our global teams and our global community in the relation to social and emotional learning. And we're wanting to know, what do you need from us? We're offering to be able to provide opportunities like this for you once a month or once every second week, if that's what people are looking for. And I'd just like to, while you're thinking about that, to remind you of some of the speakers that we've had today, just to give us an idea about what sorts of things that we could have, and let you have an opportunity to think about how there might be some people you'd like to hear from, there might be some teachers you'd like to hear from, there might be some people in the world who are doing some amazing things that we might be able to bring together to share with each other, that would help us all not to feel so isolated while we're going through this pandemic at the moment across the world. So this morning we had our keynote speaker, Shailandra Sharma from Delhi, when he was talking about the happiness curriculum. So that would be really good if anyone's interested in listening to how our whole system did some work around shifting towards creating happiness across their whole region. We had some snapshots from the frontline. Again, we had some SEL practitioners who were doing some work. We did 10-minute sessions again. And we had a keynote speaker from Brazil. We had Marcela talking about the implementation of SEL across her country and what she was doing there. We also had Stephanie and Roxanne, both from universities, one from Harvard and one from New York University, talking about how they've been able to set up systems to look at what tools are available and what sort of assessments are available for SEL. We've had a community conversation again. We asked the group that we had on this morning, we had about 200 people on this morning. We asked what were they interested in hearing about from practitioners from around the world, from policymakers, from people like yourselves. And then we had a public assembly at 1 o'clock at Pacific Daylight Time, where we had the Synergized Impact Network Exchange. They joined us, they invited Karanga to come along to that and spend some time with them. And we had an hour-and-a-half session talking with them. So that's also been recorded and available online. So we had an opportunity to talk there. And this afternoon we've had, or whatever time of the day it is for you, we've had Margot Foster, who spoke beautifully about developing expert learners and learning agency from South Australia. We've had some more snapshots again. We've had Jordan speaking about advocacy strategies. We've had some tools and from our team from Microsoft. We've had an opportunity to hear some different stories, and we've had all of the snapshot people speaking again too. So I think one of the things is that hopefully that's given you an opportunity to not feel so isolated, to know that people are still working together, people are still thinking about each other and wanting to connect with each other. So one of the things that we really would love to hear from you is from the Karanga team. What is it that you would like to hear from us? Are there people that you'd like to hear from? Are there speakers you'd like to hear from? And are there some other ways we can connect with you? So this is an opportunity for you to share some ideas with us. So if you can either use the chat panel, or Matt was going to sort of maybe have a little conversation and give an opportunity to ask question and answer. So feel free to jump in and share your ideas with us.
Yeah, and just to kind of tag on what we can do here, you can put it in the chat, or if you would like, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, there's a button called Raise Hand for all of the attendees, and if you click on that, and then we will provide you the opportunity to actually speak, and we can actually have a conversation here. So feel free to take advantage of that if you'd like.
Or give us any feedback from today, anything you liked, anything you didn't like, hot and cold feedback, warm freezing feedback, anything that worked for you, anything that didn't. Mark's Babel, sorry, he has to drink his wine.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's United Nations International Day of Happiness, and it makes me happy.
We've got to find ways of being happy together.
I was looking at it, you know, I'm setting up my own wine walk inside my house.
We have to find ways to connect. Okay, so Tim's putting one up for experiential educators from Europe, EEE.
Tim Pearson just raised his hand, I think.
Tim, would you like to speak?
Yes, and let's see, I guess it's a voice versus video, but the Experiential Educators group that I just put up is a group that I've gone to visit from Alaska for the last 15 years. They do experiential education in Europe, a variety of different countries, quite a variety of countries. They're coaches, trainers, people who typically have their own practices, you know, small companies in a wide variety of countries. And I'm just thinking that there's an opportunity for some cross-fertilization in terms of networking networks. And I have told them about this group, and they're looking at doing a virtual conference this year, given the current situation. And so I know this group has talked of, you know, very much experiential activities in terms of social and emotional learning, and that group, the European group, uses a lot of experiential activities in working in the public and private sectors. And so I would just encourage anyone interested to check out that link. And they also have a Facebook public page, and also a LinkedIn public forum. And again, it's the power of the network, and there are some really wonderful people in that group, and I've just been excited to watch and hear the presentations today, and want to thank all of you for taking the time to put this together.
Great, thank you so much, Tim. Is there anyone in particular that we could contact to, or maybe you could send us an email, and we can have a discussion around somebody in particular who might want to speak on one of our conferences too. So we could maybe go offline and talk that through a bit later on.
Happy to do so. Yes.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Tim. Okay, and I see Mary Coverdale, you've made a comment around the idea of being able to advocate through the lens of measurement and assessment. Could Karanga do this? Do you want to share a little bit more about what you're thinking there, Mary?
Can you hear me now, Joe?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Yeah, so look, I think that one of the big things that's come through this morning is, for me, the notion of a gateway, and that one of the big barriers we've got is the development of credibility or integrity around the idea of embedding social and emotional learning into a measurement profile. I think that all of the barriers that were put up this morning around teacher resistance, and also parent resistance were all valid, and the advocacy around that is both political and educational. So it's a big task to do, but I think it's one that we're ready to do, and I think the appetite for it now globally is there. So perhaps Karanga could think about a way of doing that.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Have you got anyone in particular that you know that would be a great speaker to speak with on that with for us? Just let us know.
Yeah, and I think Jean Clinton probably is a great start.
Okay.
I think the people who are scientists, who are practitioners in the psychological field and who've got credibility in the educational sphere are ones that we should look to, and she comes to mind fairly early, but then I guess my knowledge of that's probably fairly limited globally as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mary. That's awesome. We'll certainly be in touch with Jean. She's on our hit list for sure. Okay, thank you. Who else do we have? Lester. Lester, did you want to speak? Lester, would you like to share what you wanted to connect on? No? Okay. Yes,
Hey
yes.
Joe, I've just popped a link in the text chat box while Lester comes on, just of the how are you feeling response. If people are interested, it's in the chat box.
Okay, great, thank you. And I can see Lester's ready to talk.
Thank you. Yes, it's been wonderful to get to know Karanga and a lot of the work that you're doing. I think the learning part of it is critical if we're learning a new civilization. So the interest in learning. I was wondering if there's a distinction being made between pedagogy as child learning and andragogy as people as adult learning.
That's a good question. Anybody want to tackle answering that one?
Well, I'll jump in on that. I mean, I think that you're touching on something that's really like the cutting edge of social emotional learning right now. I know in my own work, I see constantly people talking about the need for adult support of SEL, and in fact, people who have long-standing social emotional learning implementations in schools and districts, who are reflecting on their progress, and they've had great progress, and they reflect on it and say we should have started with the adults. We need to start with the adults. And research is backing that up as well. And as that is emerging, you're starting to see more focus on that, more focus from providers and more focus from researchers and more focus from organizations like CASEL on what does that look like? What is SEL look like for adults? Because it doesn't look the same as it does for kids. So I think that you've got a great idea, and I think and there's some out there, right? There's some support for that out there right now. But I think if you look back a year from now, you're going to see a completely different landscape with a lot of focus on adult SEL.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, Lester. I in my own work also, I have completely redesigned a whole set of tools that I had written for designing learning for teachers, but now it's actually I've repurposed them completely to work on wellbeing for teachers first, before they even start to work with their students. So it's a completely different set of tools now. So I think that's been a really big learning for a lot of us over the last few years, to really focus on adults first because of their own understanding of who they are, how they fit into the world, and how they're contributing to humanity as well, before we even start to even think about how we're working with our own children.
Yeah.
So that's a really good point.
Hello, Lester, Luca Parry here. I think it's a fantastic reflection, and I think just to add on both the points that Matt and Jojo have just made, is that the idea of thinking as an ecology or as an ecosystem, I think is something that we see happening globally. And so the idea is that we cannot just focus on one particular aspect and expect there to be any sort of significant transformation over the long term. So when we think about any kind of human system or human development, we need to think about all the different interactions within that, using the organic metaphor rather than the mechanistic or the engineering one. So rather than what are the cogs, what are the levers, it's what are the preconditions? Who are the people that are involved in supporting development? I mean, some of my work in the business community, people do not talk about social emotional learning ever. They talk about skills for the new economy. They talk about soft skills, which is frustrating somewhat as an educator, to be fair. But ultimately, we are talking about the same constructs. And I think if this moment in history gives us any kind of opportunity, is to reframe not just what schooling is, but also what contribution might be, generally speaking. Like, what does work actually mean? What is it for when you can't physically? So just some of my reflections on that really good question.
That's good. Thanks, Luca. And I think we've got some more comments in here, and Tim, you've added another name of Roger Greenway from Scotland. Definitely, he's certainly somebody we would like to have a look at. Thank you to Mark, he's moved on.
We've got somebody watching over on Facebook, Shelley Cardiff, and she would like to see us continue as a professional group coming together to focus on the impact we can make when prioritizing SEL.
Great, excellent. Okay, we certainly do want to be working on that. Another topic here: educator in low-income community school in Nigeria. Is that a suggestion for a speaker? I think that looks like a suggestion for a speaker. Okay. And then I think, anybody else have any other ideas for speakers? Then please feel free to send them through to us. I think we are in really interesting times, and one of the things that we do really want to do is to make sure that we let people know that we are here, and that we are really all working together to try and find solutions to the current crisis that we find ourselves in. One of the things that I talk a lot about now is contributive learning, where we all want to contribute to the world to make it a better place. And I think the youth in particular, they're showing us that they want to find meaning and fulfillment through contribution. And I think that if we give each other the opportunity to be able to contribute in some way, then that gets us out of ourselves and helps us to feel better about what we're doing in the world and who we are. So I'd really like to just say thank you very much to everybody who's spent some time with us today, taken time out of their days to spend time together. Even though we physically can't be close, we certainly are socially close and socially and emotionally getting close together. So it's exciting to have that chance to be with you all today. Hopefully we can learn together, grow together, and give each other the opportunity to spend time learning about each other, learning with each other, and learning for each other to make the world a better place. So I'd just like to pass on my thank yous and say it's been a great afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are, and look forward to spending some time with you again in the near future. And I'd like to pass it back to Matt, who has been hosting us for this afternoon, and to Luca. So thank you very much for my part. It's been a great pleasure to work with you today.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jojo, for hosting. And I just want to say that this has been a wonderful day of coming together around social emotional learning and supporting each other's work and hearing about each other's work. It's been a privilege to be a part of it. I want to remind everybody that the recordings of this session and the session that happened earlier, as well as the public assembly that happened in between, will be available on the SEL and Education community and the SEL and Education Twitter feed. They're available right now. And we will also be gathering the PowerPoints that you saw today and making sure that they get distributed, and we'll let you know where you can find them. I'd love to encourage everybody to stay connected. The SEL Education community is one forum for that. There's a lot of other forums out there as well. And just like Shelley said a few minutes ago, we've come together today as a wonderful professional learning community, and we can continue to work together and continue to support each other through events like this, and also asynchronously. Whenever things come up, whenever we need support, we can reach out to each other. We have the ability to do that. So I'll pass it off to Luca for some last words, and thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Matt and Jojo. Just an acknowledgement, really, of this moment in history, the backdrop, and all the collective challenges that we face. I think from our perspective here at Karanga, really this is all about partnerships. It's all about movement building. And so however we can connect with your work, anything that you're doing, how we can support you, because effectively we'll all be better by sharing our best ideas, particularly at this point in time. So our kind of call to action, as Matt has said, we have the SEL and EDU Facebook group. It's a fantastic place to share ideas, to ask questions. Also, please sign up through karanga.org, Karanga.org, as we're starting to share increasingly some of the amazing ways that people are adapting, but also centralizing this work. You know, the core human skills, the social, emotional, and of course, cognitive capabilities that will serve us well, both in school, in work, and in life, in whatever the world looks like over the coming months, and then ultimately into the future. So thank you from me here in South Australia. Sun's shining outside, it's midday, and I really look forward to seeing you all and staying socially connected, if not physically isolated or physically distanced, as we move forward in our collective work and our collective endeavors. So thank you all very much, and looking forward to the next opportunity to engage in deep conversation so that we can make the change we want to see in the world.
Ka kite anō.
Great. So
Bye-bye.
be